Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the sound. Not the clash of swords against shields. Imagine something more elegant, more deliberate, more hypnotic. The sound of a double-bladed axe spinning through the air, cutting precise circles through space itself, accompanied by the most unexpected of battle cries. An opera singer's voice, soaring and powerful, echoing across the battlefield with notes that somehow make destruction beautiful. This is the signature of the Valkyrie, and her story is woven through thousands of years of mythology, game design philosophy, strategic evolution, and the countless battles fought in the arenas of Clash Royale. The Valkyrie stands as one of the most recognizable figures in the entire Clash universe. With her vibrant orange hair flowing behind her, her piercing blue eyes focused with warrior's intensity, and that massive double-bladed axe that seems impossibly heavy yet moves with grace in her hands, she represents something fundamental about the game itself. She is not the flashiest card. She doesn't rain down destruction from the sky like a rocket spell. She doesn't charge with the unstoppable momentum of a prince. She doesn't possess the raw and devastating power of a P.E.K.K.A. What she does, however, is something perhaps more valuable. She endures. She persists. She stands her ground and spins, and in that spinning motion, she creates zones of absolute control that few other cards can match. When you deploy a Valkyrie on the battlefield, you're not just placing a troop. You're making a statement about your strategy, about your patience, about your understanding of the fundamental rhythm that governs Clash Royale combat. She costs 4 elixir, a moderate investment that sits in that perfect middle ground between cheap cycle cards and expensive win conditions. 4 elixir buys you not just her considerable health pool, not just her area damage that strikes in a full 360-degree circle, but something more intangible. It buys you breathing room. It buys you time to think, to react, to formulate your next move while she handles the immediate threat with her methodical, spinning assault. Her appearance tells a story all by itself. The orange hair is no accident of design. It's a visual signal, a flag that announces her presence on the battlefield. In the chaos of a Clash Royale match, where units swarm and spells explode and buildings crumble, that shock of orange hair becomes a landmark, a reference point. Your eyes can find her instantly in the mayhem, track her movement, judge her health, assess whether she needs support, or whether she's handling the situation with her characteristic efficiency. The blue eyes provide contrast, a touch of cold calculation to balance the fiery hair. They suggest intelligence behind the strength, strategy behind the spinning. This is not a berserker who charges blindly into combat. This is a warrior who has mastered her weapon so completely that what looks like a simple spinning attack is actually a carefully controlled expression of martial prowess. The double-bladed axe itself deserves contemplation. In real historical warfare, double-bladed axes were actually quite rare. They look impressive, certainly, but they present significant balance issues and don't offer substantial advantages over single-blade designs in practical combat. But the Valkyrie doesn't exist in the realm of practical historical warfare. She exists in a space where mythology meets game mechanics, where the rule of cool and the demands of gameplay balance create their own internal logic. That double-bladed axe serves multiple purposes in her design. Visually, it justifies her 360-degree attack pattern. She doesn't need to turn, doesn't need to reposition. The axe itself, with blades on both ends, creates damage in all directions as she spins. Mechanically, it explains why her attacks can hit multiple targets simultaneously, why ground troops surrounding her all take damage regardless of their position relative to her facing direction. The team-colored suit she wears speaks to the essential nature of Clash Royale itself. Whether she's clad in blue or red, whether she's fighting for your towers or against them, she remains fundamentally the same warrior. The color marks allegiance, but doesn't change identity. This is elegant game design philosophy made manifest in character design. Every Valkyrie is the same Valkyrie, yet in each match she fights for one side against the other. And the color coding provides instant recognition without requiring different character models. Her wristbands and boots suggest practical warrior's gear, protection for joints that bear the stress of constant combat, armor that allows mobility while providing defense. But there's more to the Valkyrie than just her appearance in Clash Royale. To truly understand her, to appreciate the depth of her character and the reasons behind her design, we need to journey back. We need to travel not just to the development studios where game designers first sketched her abilities and balanced her statistics, but further. We need to go back thousands of years, to the cold northern lands where ancient peoples told stories around fires, where warriors sought glory in battle, and poets sang of what waited beyond death. We need to understand the original Valkyries, the mythological beings from whom this video game character draws her name and her fundamental concept. Because the Valkyrie in Clash Royale is not just a character plucked from nowhere. She is a translation, an interpretation, a modern retelling of one of mythology's most fascinating and complex figures. The ancient choosers Norse mythology's Valkyries, long before the first mobile device displayed a Clash Royale battlefield, long before the concept of video games existed, long before electricity or engines or even the printing press, people in the harsh lands of Scandinavia told stories. These weren't just entertainment, though they certainly served that purpose during long winter nights. They were explanations for the world, frameworks for understanding life and death, courage and cowardice, fate and choice. Among the most captivating figures in these Norse myths were the Valkyries, and their story is both darker and more nuanced than most modern interpretations suggest. The word Valkyrie comes from Old Norse Valkyrja, which translates literally to chooser of the slain. Already in this name we find the core of what made these figures so compelling and so fearsome to the Norse peoples. They were choosers. They exercised agency over the most fundamental question a warrior could face, whether they would live or die in battle. This wasn't a passive role. The Valkyries didn't simply arrive after battles ended to collect souls like some cosmic cleanup crew. They were active participants in the determination of fate itself, deciding before swords were even drawn which warriors would fall and which would survive. In the most ancient tellings, before the concept of Valhalla developed into the glorious hall we know from later sources, Valkyries were quite likely much darker figures. Some scholars believe they evolved from older death demons, supernatural entities drawn to battlefields not as noble guides, but as harbingers of carnage, beings who feasted on the violence and death that warfare produces. Think of them as closer to the Greek Keres, those spirits of violent death who hovered over battlefields, or to the Irish Morrigan, the war goddess who appeared as a crow picking over the dead. These weren't beautiful maidens on white horses. They were aspects of death itself, supernatural predators for whom human warfare was both hunting ground and banquet. This darker origin helps explain some of the more sinister aspects of Valkyrie lore that persisted even in later, more romanticized versions. The Darhalja, a poem preserved in the Njál saga, provides one of the most vivid and disturbing depictions of Valkyries. It describes 12 women working at a loom, but this is no ordinary weaving. The loom is weighted with severed human heads. The threads are human intestines. And what they weave is the fate of warriors about to fight at the Battle of Clontarf. As they work, they sing about how they're determining who will live and die, how their weaving dictates the flow of battle. This is far from the noble warrior maidens of later depictions. These are beings whose power over life and death is visceral, physical, grounded in the bloody reality of medieval warfare. But as Norse culture evolved, as the concept of Valhalla became more developed and central to Norse religious thought, the Valkyries evolved with it. They transformed from death demons into something more complex, more nuanced. They became servants of Odin, the Allfather, the chief god of the Norse pantheon. Their role shifted from causing death capriciously to selecting which fallen warriors were worthy of a place in Valhalla. This is a crucial distinction. They were still choosing who died in many versions of the myths, but now that choice had purpose, had meaning, had a grander design behind it. Valhalla itself deserves understanding to fully grasp the Valkyrie's role. The word likely derives from Volvol, which may have originally meant something closer to Rock of the Slain rather than Hall of the Slain. This suggests that even the concept of the afterlife destination evolved over time. In its most developed form, Valhalla was portrayed as a magnificent hall in Asgard, the realm of the gods. Its roof was made of shields, its rafters from spears. Inside, chosen warriors called jynxzi spent their days fighting each other in glorious combat, dying again and again, only to be restored to life each evening for a night of feasting and drinking mead served to them by the Valkyries themselves. This eternal cycle of combat and feasting had a purpose. It was preparation. The jynxzi were training, maintaining their skills, keeping themselves battle-ready for Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, the prophesied final battle where the forces of chaos would assault Asgard and the gods themselves would fight and die. When that day came, Odin would need every warrior he could muster. The Valkyrie's job, therefore, wasn't simply to collect the dead. It was to recruit for this ultimate army, to identify warriors who combined skill in battle with the courage and honor that made them worthy of fighting alongside gods. The sources describe Valkyries in varying ways. Sometimes they number 9, sometimes 12, sometimes 13. Some sources suggest there were as many as 300. Individual Valkyries were named in various texts. Brynhildr, perhaps the most famous, whose story inspired Wagner's opera and indirectly influenced the tale of Sleeping Beauty. Sigrun, who appears in the Helga Visa Hundingsbana poems. Hildr, associated with endless battle. Skegel, who appears in the tale of King Haakon. Gndul, mentioned in the Poetic Edda. Each had their own stories, their own characteristics, their own relationships with mortal heroes. Because yes, the Valkyries didn't remain distant, purely supernatural figures in all the myths. Many stories tell of Valkyries who fell in love with mortal heroes, who defied Odin's commands to save the men they loved, who married humans and lived mortal lives. The story of Brynhildr exemplifies this. She defied Odin by choosing the wrong king to survive in a battle, choosing based on who she thought deserved victory rather than following Odin's decree. As punishment, Odin stripped her of her Valkyrie status, put her into an enchanted sleep, and imprisoned her within a ring of fire. Only a hero brave enough to ride through those flames could wake and claim her. This became the hero Sigurd, and their tragic love story has echoed through literature for over 1,000 years. These stories of Valkyries loving mortals and choosing to become mortal themselves add fascinating complexity to their mythology. They suggest that Valkyries, despite their supernatural status, weren't so different from humans. They could feel love, could question orders, could choose personal bonds over divine duty. This made them more relatable, more sympathetic, but it also emphasized their role as intermediaries between human and divine realms. They existed in both worlds, understood both perspectives, and sometimes found themselves torn between them. The imagery associated with Valkyries in the myths includes several recurring elements. Horses were primary among these. Valkyries were often depicted riding to battlefields on horseback, though these weren't ordinary horses. Some sources describe them as riding through the air, the horse's hooves never touching ground. Some Valkyries were associated with swans, able to transform into these birds while wearing swan cloaks that granted flight. Others rode wolves or boars. The emphasis was always on their ability to travel between realms, to move from Asgard to Midgard and back, to cross the boundary between life and death. Their weapons were typically spears, and they wore armor and helmets. They were warriors themselves, not just collectors of warriors. This is important. The Valkyries weren't passive observers of combat. They understood warfare intimately. They knew what made a warrior skilled, what made them brave, what made them worthy. In some versions of the myths, they actively participated in battles, fighting alongside or against mortal warriors to ensure the outcomes Odin desired. Their power included the ability to influence battles through supernatural means, to cast spells that protected some warriors while leaving others vulnerable, to create confusion in enemy ranks or inspire courage in allied forces. The association with brightness, gold, and fairness appears frequently in descriptions of Valkyries. They were beautiful, certainly, but it was a terrible beauty, the kind that inspired awe and fear in equal measure. They represented the glory of dying in battle, the promise that a warrior's death wasn't an ending but a transition to something greater. For a culture where dying peacefully in bed was considered shameful, where glory in combat was the highest aspiration, the Valkyries offered hope. They promised that the best warriors, those who fought bravest and fell with honor, would be chosen, would be elevated, would fight in the greatest battle at the end of time itself. It's worth noting that the goddess Freya also collected half of the slain warriors, taking them to her realm of Folkvanger. This created an interesting duality in Norse afterlife beliefs. Odin and Freya essentially divided the honored dead between them, though the myths are unclear about exactly how this division was determined. Some scholars suggest it represented different types of warriors or different paths of initiation into warrior culture. Freya was associated with magic, fertility, and love as well as war, suggesting her chosen might be different from Odin's in some fundamental way. The relationship between Freya and the Valkyries is complex, with some sources suggesting the Valkyries served both Odin and Freya, or that Freya herself was in some sense the ultimate Valkyrie, the prototype from which they all derived. The Valkyries also served as Odin's cupbearers in Valhalla, serving mead to the Einherjar during their nightly feasts. This domestic role might seem strange alongside their fearsome battlefield duties, but it reflects the Norse understanding of women's roles as both warriors and homemakers, both fearsome and nurturing. The Valkyries embodied this duality. They brought death on the battlefield, but they also brought comfort in the afterlife. They selected who would die, but they ensured those deaths had meaning and led to something greater. As Christianity spread through Scandinavia, much of the pagan mythology was lost or transformed. The sources we have for Norse mythology were all written down in the Christian era, mostly in Iceland in the 13th century, hundreds of years after the Viking Age ended. Writers like Snorri Sturluson, who composed the Prose Edda, were Christians trying to preserve and explain the old pagan beliefs. This inevitably colored how the myths were recorded. Some scholars believe the more noble, romanticized depictions of Valkyries reflect Christian influence, making them more like angels or saints and less like the darker death spirits they may have originally been. The concept of Valhalla itself may have been influenced by Christian ideas of heaven, or it may have influenced how Northern European Christians conceptualized their own afterlife. This cultural exchange worked in both directions. The Valkyries in later medieval and romantic literature often appear more as noble warrior maidens than as supernatural forces of death, reflecting changing attitudes about warfare, death, and the role of women in society. When we look at the Valkyrie in Clash Royale through this mythological lens, we can see both the connections and the transformations. The game's Valkyrie doesn't ride a horse, doesn't fly through the air, doesn't choose who lives or dies or carry souls to any afterlife. She's been stripped of her supernatural qualities and reimagined as a warrior, pure and simple. But the core concepts remain. She's a fierce female fighter, associated with spinning motion that recalls the circular nature of battle and fate. She's powerful, effective against groups of enemies, just as mythological Valkyries dealt with masses of warriors. She operates according to rules and mechanics that make her valuable in the right situations, just as mythological Valkyries operated according to divine decree and cosmic purpose. The connection isn't literal, but it's there. A thread of inspiration running from ancient Norse campfires to modern mobile devices. The warrior's form, design, and appearance. To understand the Valkyrie as she appears in Clash Royale, we need to examine her visual design with careful attention. Character design in video games isn't arbitrary. Every choice, from color palette to proportions to equipment, serves multiple purposes. Designs must be instantly recognizable, must communicate gameplay function, must fit within the larger aesthetic of the game world, and must resonate emotionally with players. The Valkyrie's design accomplishes all of this with remarkable efficiency. Her most striking feature is undoubtedly her hair. That vibrant, almost luminous orange isn't just a color choice. It's a gameplay decision disguised as an artistic one. In the chaos of a Clash Royale battle, where multiple troops from both sides swarm across the arena, where spells explode and buildings collapse and projectiles fly in every direction, players need to be able to track their units instantly. Eye-catching, distinctive colors serve this purpose. The Valkyrie's orange hair makes her immediately identifiable even in the most crowded situations. You can glance at the screen and immediately know where she is, how she's doing, whether she needs support or is handling things independently. But there's more to it than pure practicality. Orange as a color carries psychological associations. It combines the energy and aggression of red with the optimism and approachability of yellow. It's warm, active, attention-grabbing, without being as potentially alarming as pure red. For a character whose role is often defensive, whose job is to protect your towers by eliminating threats, orange suggests reliable warmth, the comfort of knowing someone strong has your back. At the same time, it's bold enough to signal danger to opponents. When your enemy drops a Valkyrie, that orange hair is a warning. It tells you that your swarm strategy isn't going to work, that you need to rethink your approach, that the simple rush you planned has just become complicated. The orange hair flows behind her, suggesting motion even in still images. This is crucial for a character defined by spinning movement. Her hair becomes almost like a cape or banner, a visual trail that emphasizes her momentum. When she spins, that hair whips around her, creating a circular visual effect that reinforces her circular attack pattern. It's a brilliant piece of visual design language, where the character's static appearance suggests the dynamic movement that defines her in gameplay. Her eyes are striking blue, creating strong contrast with the orange hair. While we can't see them in detail during actual gameplay due to the zoomed-out camera perspective, the blue eyes in her character art establish her as thoughtful, controlled, intelligent. Blue is often associated with calmness, focus, and strategy. For a character who could easily be portrayed as a raging berserker, those blue eyes suggest something different. This is a warrior who fights with purpose and precision. The spin isn't wild flailing. It's a controlled, practiced technique. Those blue eyes, calm in the midst of orange-red fury, communicate this duality. The double-bladed axe she wields is roughly half her height, a massive weapon that looks like it should be unwieldy. In reality, double-bladed axes like this weren't common historical weapons. They look impressive, certainly, but they present balance problems and don't offer significant advantages over single-bladed designs in actual combat. But the Valkyrie doesn't exist in reality. She exists in a space where form can follow function in unconventional ways. That double-bladed axe serves a clear gameplay purpose. It visually justifies her 360-degree attack pattern. When she spins, both blades are cutting through the air, creating danger in all directions. The weapon itself explains the mechanic. The axe's size relative to her body also communicates power. This is not a light weapon. This is not a tool for quick, nimble strikes. This is for devastating blows, for cleaving through multiple opponents, for dealing damage that can't be ignored. When players see that axe, they intuitively understand what kind of damage output to expect. It's visual shorthand for hits hard. The fact that she can wield this massive weapon with apparent ease, spinning it around her body in a continuous attack pattern, establishes her as extraordinarily strong. This isn't someone who relies on speed or trickery. This is raw power made manifest. Her armor and clothing strike a balance between protection and mobility. She wears what appears to be a form-fitting suit in team colors, blue or red, depending on which side of the battle she's on, with armored elements protecting vital areas without restricting movement. Her arms are bare except for wristbands, showing muscular definition that reinforces her physical strength. Her legs are similarly protected with boots and guards that suggest warrior practicality. This isn't ornamental armor. This isn't parade dress. This is functional combat gear chosen by someone who understands warfare intimately. The wristbands deserve particular attention. They're thick and sturdy, clearly designed to protect her forearms and wrists during the stress of combat. When you're swinging a double-bladed axe in continuous spinning attacks, the strain on your wrists and arms would be immense. Those wristbands are practical protective equipment, but they also serve as visual indicators of a warrior who knows her craft. She's not just naturally gifted with a weapon. She's prepared, equipped, professional. The attention to this kind of detail makes her feel more real, more grounded, more like an actual warrior rather than a fantasy cartoon. Her stance in official art typically shows her mid-spin or ready to spin, axe held in both hands, body angled for motion. This dynamic posing reinforces her defying characteristic. She's not static. She's not posed standing still. She's captured in the moment of attack, the moment when she's most herself. This creates visual consistency between her art representation and her in-game appearance. When you see her card, you see spinning motion. When you deploy her in battle, you see spinning motion. The character's identity is completely unified around this single defining action. The design has evolved slightly over the years. Early versions of her card art in Clash Royale actually used art assets from Clash of Clans, where she originated as a troupe. Before June 2021, her appearance was a bit different, showing her in what looked like more Viking-inspired clothing with fur elements. The current design is more streamlined, more modern in its aesthetic, fitting better with Clash Royale's somewhat more stylized, slightly more cartoony art direction compared to Clash of Clans. But the core elements remain constant. The orange hair, the blue eyes, the double-bladed axe, the spinning attack pattern. These are non-negotiable aspects of her identity that carry through all her appearances. Her facial expression in art, when visible, typically shows fierce determination mixed with what might be interpreted as enjoyment. There's often the hint of a smile, suggesting this is a warrior who loves battle, who finds fulfillment in combat. This isn't someone being forced to fight. This is someone who has found their purpose, their calling, and throws themselves into it with gusto. It makes her more charismatic, more appealing as a character. We like characters who are good at what they do, and who clearly enjoy doing it. The Valkyrie exemplifies this. She's not a tragic figure reluctantly fighting. She's a warrior who has mastered her weapon and takes pride in that mastery. The proportions of her character model are typical of Clash Royale's art style, slightly exaggerated, somewhat cartoony, but not to the degree of complete caricature. Her head is perhaps slightly larger, relative to her body than realistic proportions would suggest, following animation principles that make characters more readable and expressive. Her muscles are defined but not grotesquely exaggerated. She looks strong, certainly capable of wielding that massive axe, but not like a bodybuilder or cartoon strongman. She's athletic, powerful, but still within the bounds of believability within the game's aesthetic universe. When the evolved Valkyrie was introduced in January 2024, her appearance changed to reflect her enhanced abilities. The evolution maintains the core design elements, but amplifies them. Her armor might appear more ornate or battle-worn, suggesting experience and growth. The axe might have additional visual effects when she activates her tornado ability. Her hair might have subtle animation changes to emphasize the wind she generates with her evolved spinning. These are subtle shifts, not complete redesigns. The evolution is still recognizably the same character, just showing advancement and development. This is smart design philosophy. Players need to instantly recognize evolutions as enhanced versions of familiar cards, not mistake them for entirely new units. The design of the Valkyrie also needs to work at multiple scales. In the small icon used for her card, she must be recognizable. In the zoomed-out battlefield view during actual gameplay, she must be distinguishable from other units. In promotional art and larger images, she must have enough detail to be interesting and characterful. This multi-scale requirement demands elegant simplicity in core design elements combined with enough detail to reward closer inspection. The orange hair and spinning axe serve the recognition requirements. The facial expression, armor details, and weapon design provide the interest in larger images. It's a complete package that works at every level the game requires. There's also something to be said for what the Valkyrie's design doesn't include. She doesn't have wings, unlike some mythological Valkyrie depictions. She doesn't ride a horse. She doesn't have an elaborate helmet that might obscure her face and hair. She doesn't carry a shield. These omissions are as meaningful as the inclusions. Wings and horses would complicate her silhouette, make her less immediately recognizable, and wouldn't serve any gameplay purpose since she's a ground unit. A helmet would hide that distinctive orange hair. A shield would take up hand space needed for her two-handed axe. Every element of her design has been stripped down to essentials, keeping only what serves both visual clarity and gameplay communication. In the broader context of Clash Royale's character roster, the Valkyrie's design fits a particular niche. She's clearly a warrior, but distinctly different from other fighters in the game. She's not as heavily armored as a knight. She's not as imposing as a prince. She's not as wild-looking as a barbarian. She occupies her own space in the visual vocabulary of the game, immediately distinguishable from every other card. This uniqueness is crucial in a game with over 100 cards. Each one needs to be instantly identifiable, and the Valkyrie's design accomplishes this perfectly. The team color system, where her suit changes color based on which side she's fighting for, is an elegant solution to a common game design problem. In real-time multiplayer games, players need to instantly distinguish friendly units from enemy units. The color coding system in Clash Royale handles this without requiring duplicate character models or complicated marking systems. The Valkyrie's core design remains the same whether she's blue or red, but that color shift provides all the information players need to know whether to support her or counter her. Her design also needs to appeal to Clash Royale's diverse player base. She can't be too childish or she won't appeal to older players. She can't be too realistic or gritty, or she won't fit the game's approachable aesthetic. She can't be too sexualized, or she becomes inappropriate for younger players and alienates female players. The current design threads this needle successfully. She's tough, capable, powerful, but also somewhat cartoonish and stylized in a way that keeps her appropriate for all ages, while still being cool enough to appeal to teenagers and adults. It's a delicate balance that many game character designs fail to achieve, but the Valkyrie manages it. From one game to another, the Clash of Clans journey, the Valkyrie's story in the Clash universe, didn't begin with Clash Royale. To understand her fully, we need to travel back to Clash of Clans, the game that laid the foundation for everything that followed. Clash of Clans launched in 2012. 3.5 years before Clash Royale would arrive in early 2016. In those years, The game established the world, the characters, and the visual language that would define Supercell's breakout franchise. The Valkyrie was there from relatively early on. Introduced as a Dark Elixir troop, unlocked at Town Hall 8, requiring players to upgrade their Dark Barracks to level 3. In Clash of Clans, the Valkyrie served a similar but not identical role to her Clash Royale incarnation. She was a ground troop with area damage, specializing in destroying groups of buildings or enemy troops with her spinning axe attacks. Her signature move was the same, spinning to create 360-degree damage around her, but the context was different. Clash of Clans is a base-building strategy game with asynchronous PvP combat. You design a village with defenses, then attack other players' villages with an army you've trained. Battles unfold in real time once launched, but you're not playing against the other player directly. You're replaying against their base design and whatever troops they may have stationed in their clan castle for defense. In this context, the Valkyrie's role was primarily offensive. You would include Valkyries in your attacking army to quickly clear buildings or deal with defending clan castle troops. Her spinning attack let her damage multiple buildings simultaneously if they were close together, making her very efficient in certain base layouts. But she had to be used carefully. Unlike many Clash of Clans troops that target specific building types, Valkyries simply attacked the closest building. If they got distracted by the wrong targets, they could waste valuable time and accomplish little. Strategic deployment was everything. Players learned to use wall breakers to create paths for their Valkyries, to funnel them toward the core of enemy bases, where the most valuable buildings sat clustered together, waiting for that spinning axe to tear through them. The Valkyrie in Clash of Clans underwent numerous balance changes over the years, much like she would later in Clash Royale. There were periods when she was considered overpowered, dominating the meta with strategies built entirely around mass Valkyrie attacks. There were other periods when she fell out of favor, deemed too expensive or too situational compared to other Dark Elixir options. The developers at Supercell constantly adjusted her statistics, her training time, her housing space requirement, all in an effort to keep her viable but not overwhelming. One of the most significant updates came in 2016 when Supercell dramatically reduced her housing space from 20 to 8 spaces in the army camps. This change transformed her viability overnight. Suddenly, players could bring far more Valkyries in a single attack. Where before you might include 3 or 4 Valkyries as specialized tools in a diverse army composition, now you could field armies of 10, 12, even 15 Valkyries. This led to the rise of Valkyrie spam strategies, particularly effective at certain town hall levels, where players would overwhelm bases with wave after wave of spinning warriors, cutting through defenses like a mechanical lawnmower through grass. The visual design in Clash of Clans established the template that Clash Royale would later refine. The orange hair was already distinctive. The double-bladed axe was already her signature. The spinning attack animation was already mesmerizing to watch. When multiple Valkyries attacked the same area, their synchronized spinning created a visual effect the players found deeply satisfying. There's something hypnotic about watching those coordinated spins, those axes cutting identical circles through space, that appeals to our pattern recognition instincts. It looks organized, efficient, almost beautiful, despite being focused entirely on destruction. The sound design for the Valkyrie in Clash of Clans also established elements that would carry forward. Her battle cry, that operatic wail, was already present. According to developer commentary, this was inspired by Richard Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries, perhaps the most famous musical piece associated with Valkyrie mythology. Wagner's opera cycle, the Ring des Nibelungen, drew heavily from Norse mythology and helped shape modern popular understanding of Valkyries. The opening of Die Walküre, the opera where Ride of the Valkyries appears, features warrior maidens riding to collect fallen heroes. The music is dramatic, powerful, unmistakably martial. Having the Valkyrie in Clash of Clans belt out operatic notes during combat was both a clever reference to this cultural touchstone and a way to make her orally distinctive. Players could hear when Valkyries were fighting, even if they weren't looking directly at them. When Supercell began developing Clash Royale, they faced interesting decisions about which units from Clash of Clans to include and how to adapt them for the new game's real-time, head-to-head format. Clash Royale is fundamentally different from Clash of Clans. It's a real-time strategy game with MOBA elements, where two players face off directly, deploying troops and casting spells in lanes leading to each other's towers. Matches last 3 minutes with potential overtime, demanding constant attention and rapid decision-making. The slower, methodical pacing of Clash of Clans attacks, where you could take your time planning your next deployment, wouldn't work here. The Valkyrie was an obvious inclusion for several reasons. First, she was popular and recognizable. Players who had experience with Clash of Clans would immediately understand what she did when they saw her card. Second, her area damage mechanic filled an important role in Clash Royale's gameplay ecosystem. The game needed cards that could efficiently handle swarms of cheap troops, and the Valkyrie's spinning attack made her perfect for this. Third, her visual design was already distinctive and strong. She would stand out in the smaller, more zoomed-out battlefield view of Clash Royale without requiring significant redesign. But she did need adjustment. In Clash of Clans, you could deploy multiple Valkyries simultaneously, creating those mesmerizing spinning formations. In Clash Royale, when you play a Valkyrie card, you get exactly one Valkyrie. This makes each individual unit more important, more of an investment, more of a tactical decision point. The developers had to ensure that a single Valkyrie provided enough value to justify her 4 elixir cost, that she could function as a standalone defensive tool or offensive support, that she didn't require other specific cards to be effective. Her speed was adjusted for Clash Royale's faster pace. She moves at medium speed in Clash Royale, a stat that determines how quickly she crosses the battlefield. This speed classification is crucial. Too fast and she would leave supporting troops behind, arriving at enemy towers alone and vulnerable. Too slow, and opponents would have too much time to react to her, deploying counters before she could engage. Medium speed puts her in that sweet spot where she moves with purpose, but not such haste that she becomes easy to isolate and eliminate. Her hit speed, the time between her attack swings, was calibrated carefully. At 1.5 seconds between hits, she attacks reasonably quickly without becoming overwhelming. Each spin of her axe happens at this interval, creating a rhythm to her combat that players can internalize and predict. If you're defending against a Valkyrie, you can count the seconds between her attacks, timing your deployments to land between her swings when possible. If you're using a Valkyrie, you learn to trust that rhythm, to know approximately when she eliminates swarms, when she'll have dealt enough damage to support units behind her. The range of her attack is one of her defining features. With a melee range that extends in all directions around her, she creates a danger zone where ground troops simply cannot survive in groups. The exact radius was tuned through extensive playtesting to be large enough that she reliably hits multiple targets, but not so large that she becomes impossible to approach. This radius is why precise placement matters so much with Valkyrie. A few tiles difference in where you deploy her can determine whether she hits 2 enemy units or 6, whether she absorbs a prince's charge or lets it slip past to your tower. Her health pool received careful attention in the transition to Clash Royale. She needed to be tanky enough to survive long enough to accomplish her purpose, to take hits from multiple small units or even a few strikes from larger threats without immediately crumbling. But she couldn't be too durable, or she would become a universal answer to everything, playable in every situation without meaningful counterplay. The health value they settled on makes her resilient against swarms and small to medium threats, but vulnerable to focused fire from air troops. Ranged units or heavy hitters like Prince or Mini P.E.K.K.A., the damage per hit was another crucial balance point. She needed to two-shot or three-shot most small troops like skeletons, goblins, and even sturdier units like archers or musketeers within a reasonable time frame. But her damage per second shouldn't rival specialist damage dealers. She's not meant to be your primary source of tower damage or your answer to tanks. She's area control, swarm clear, a defensive anchor that can transition to offense. Her damage values reflect this role, high enough to be threatening but not so high that she becomes the best answer to every problem. The 4 elixir cost is perhaps the most important number associated with the Valkyrie. Elixir economy is the fundamental resource management challenge in Clash Royale. You generate elixir over time, spend it to deploy troops and cast spells, and victory usually goes to the player who gets more value from their elixir expenditure. At 4 elixir, the Valkyrie sits in a perfect middle ground. She's not so cheap that she can be casually deployed without thought, but not so expensive that using her represents a major commitment that leaves you vulnerable if she doesn't perform well. This cost makes her a neutral trade or slight positive trade against many common swarm cards. If your opponent plays Skeleton Army, 3 elixir, and you answer with Valkyrie, 4 elixir, you've spent 1 more elixir, but your Valkyrie survives and can continue forward. If they play Goblin Gang, 3 elixir, and you drop Valkyrie, same result. Even against more expensive combinations, like a Mini P.E.K.K.A. supported by bats, the Valkyrie can provide value by eliminating the support troops and tanking some hits from the Mini P.E.K.K.A., allowing your tower and other defenders to clean up. These elixir trading calculations happen constantly in Clash Royale, and the Valkyrie's 4 elixir price point makes her a reliable participant in favorable trades. The adaptation from Clash of Clans to Clash Royale also involved thinking about how the Valkyrie would interact with the new game's spell system. Clash Royale features damage-dealing spells like Fireball, Rocket, and Lightning that can instantly eliminate or severely damage troops. The Valkyrie needed sufficient health to not be killed by spells in her cost range. A Fireball or Poison spell shouldn't eliminate her entirely, though they might weaken her significantly. This durability against spell damage is part of what makes her a reliable defensive option. Your opponent can't simply spell her away when she's defending against their push. Her interaction with building targeting troops became a crucial aspect of her design. Cards like Giant, Golem, Royal Giant, and Balloon ignore defending troops and head straight for your buildings and towers. The Valkyrie can't block their path effectively because they'll just walk around her, but she excels in eliminating the support troops that typically accompany these tank units. This gives her a clear niche in the defensive lineup. She's not your answer to the tank itself, but she's often your best answer to everything else in that push, creating situations where your tower can focus fire on the tank without distraction. The transition to Clash Royale also meant the Valkyrie would be interacting with entirely new mechanics and card types that didn't exist in Clash of Clans. Buildings like Tombstone that continuously spawn troop spells like Clone, that duplicate units cards like Graveyard that summons skeletons around towers. All of these presented new situations where the Valkyrie's area damage would prove valuable, or where her limitations would become apparent. The design had to be robust enough to handle interactions that didn't even exist at launch, future-proofed against cards that hadn't been created yet. The art update that came in June 2021 represented Clash Royale beginning to establish more visual independence from Clash of Clans. While the games share a universe and many characters, Clash Royale has its own aesthetic identity, slightly more stylized, slightly more modern in its rendering. The updated Valkyrie art maintained all the recognizable elements: the orange hair, the blue eyes, the double-bladed axe, the spinning combat stance, but refined them to better match Clash Royale's evolved visual style. The new art showed her in slightly more dynamic pose, suggested motion even more clearly, and generally looked more polished while remaining completely faithful to the character's established identity. From a game design philosophy perspective, the Valkyrie represents an interesting case study in cross-game character adaptation. She's recognizably the same character in both games, serving similar general purposes: area damage, dealing with groups of enemies, but the specific implementation differs to suit each game's mechanics. This kind of successful adaptation requires understanding not just the surface-level design elements, but the underlying purpose the character serves in gameplay. The Valkyrie's purpose is area control and swarm clear. The spinning axe is simply the expression of that purpose. By keeping the purpose consistent while adjusting the implementation details to suit each game's specific needs, Supercell created a character that feels right in both contexts. The success of the Valkyrie's adaptation from Clash of Clans to Clash Royale encouraged similar transitions for other characters. The P.E.K.K.A., Wizard, Giant, and many others made the journey between games, each requiring similar thought about how to preserve their essential nature while adapting to Clash Royale has unique demands. The Valkyrie stands as one of the most successful of these adaptations, remaining popular and viable in both games across years of meta shifts and balance changes. This longevity speaks to the strength of the core design, a simple concept executed well, area damage through spinning attacks that proved flexible enough to remain relevant regardless of what new cards or mechanics get added to the games. The arena arrival, launch day, and early meta. January 4th, 2016. This was the date that Clash Royale entered its soft launch period, initially available only in certain regions before its worldwide release in March. For players lucky enough to access the game during those early months, everything was new, unexplored territory. The meta, that ever-evolving ecosystem of popular strategies and powerful deck compositions, simply didn't exist yet. Players were discovering cards, testing combinations, learning interactions, figuring out the fundamental rhythms of the game. And among those launch cards available from the beginning was the Valkyrie. In those initial days and weeks, the Valkyrie's value wasn't immediately obvious to everyone. Some players, particularly those with Clash of Clans experience, recognized her potential instantly. They understood what area damage meant in the context of handling swarms. They knew from the other game that the spinning axe was something to respect. But other players, new to the Clash universe entirely, sometimes overlooked her. Why spend 4 elixir on a troop that only hits ground units when you could get a musketeer for 4 elixir that shoots both ground and air? Why not spend 1 more elixir and get a prince with his devastating charge? The Valkyrie didn't have the immediate, obvious power of cards like Prince or Baby Dragon. Her strength was more subtle, more situational, more about denying your opponent's strategies than executing your own flashy plays. The early meta of Clash Royale was wild and chaotic compared to what would develop later. Players didn't yet understand optimal elixir management. They hadn't learned the importance of cycle times and card rotation. They hadn't developed the encyclopedic knowledge of card interactions that high-level play demands. In this environment, cheap swarm tactics were incredibly powerful. Players would dump skeleton armies, goblin gangs, and minion hordes on the arena, overwhelming opponents who didn't have good answers prepared. The Valkyrie emerged as one of the most reliable answers to these swarm strategies. Dropping a Valkyrie on top of a skeleton army became one of the game's signature defensive plays. The skeletons would surround her, their fast attack speed beginning to chip away at her health, but then her axe would spin, and in one devastating rotation, all the skeletons would vanish. The trade was favorable. 4 elixir spent to completely negate 3 elixir from the opponent, and your Valkyrie survived with most of her health intact, ready to counterpush. This interaction became fundamental to how players thought about swarm defense. If you were playing a swarm-heavy deck, You had to respect the possibility of Valkyrie. If you were facing swarm decks, Valkyrie became a consideration for your deck building. The early player base began to discover synergies, combinations of cards that worked particularly well together. The Valkyrie paired beautifully with troops that could tank for her or vice versa. A giant in front absorbing damage while the Valkyrie behind cleared defending troops became a simple but effective push. Valkyrie leading with a musketeer behind provided both area damage and single target damage, handling diverse defensive setups. Valkyrie with Hog Rider created a tanky distraction that cleared swarms while the Hog Rider damaged towers. These basic synergies formed the building blocks of deck construction philosophy. Defense into counterpush became a fundamental strategy pattern, and the Valkyrie was perfect for it. She would defend against an enemy push, survive with a portion of her health, and then become the starting point for your own offensive play. You could drop a Hog Rider behind her, add some supporting troops, and suddenly you had a dangerous counterpush that your opponent, having just spent elixir attacking, might not be ready to defend against. This rhythm of defend, survive, counter-attack is core to Clash Royale's strategic depth, and the Valkyrie has been a key enabler of this pattern since the beginning. The early tournament scene and competitive play quickly recognized the Valkyrie's value. Professional players and top-ladder competitors understood that consistency matters in competitive environments. Flashy, high-risk strategies might work sometimes, but reliable defensive tools win tournaments. The Valkyrie provided reliability. She did what she was supposed to do, every time, without fail. Drop her on swarms, and those swarms died. Use her to protect your tower, and she bought time for your tower to shoot down threats. This consistency made her a staple in many early competitive decks. Balance changes in those first months were frequent as Supercell gathered data on card usage rates and win rates across different trophy ranges. The Valkyrie received adjustments, though she was never dramatically overhauled. Small tweaks to her health, damage, or hit speed helped calibrate her to the evolving meta. When swarm strategies dominated, she became more popular, and sometimes her usage rates would climb high enough to warrant a small nerf. When air-heavy metas developed and players loaded decks with baby dragons, minions, and balloons, Valkyrie usage would drop since she couldn't address those threats, and sometimes she'd receive small buffs to keep her competitive. The introduction of new cards constantly challenged the Valkyrie's place in the meta. Each new release potentially changed what decks were popular, what strategies worked, what threats needed answering. The Valkyrie had to prove her relevance with each shift. When Sparky was added, a high elixir splash damage threat that could devastate if not countered, the Valkyrie wasn't a great answer, but she could tank Sparky shots while you deployed more appropriate counters. When the Lumberjack arrived with his fast movement and high single target damage, the Valkyrie could survive his assault and clear support troops, though she wasn't ideal for handling the Lumberjack himself. Each new card created new puzzles, and the Valkyrie's role in solving those puzzles had to be evaluated. Deck archetypes began to crystallize in those early months. Players discovered that certain strategies worked better than others, that certain combinations of cards had synergy that made them stronger than the sum of their parts. Beatdown decks focused on building large pushes with tanks and support troops. Siege decks used buildings like X-Bow and Mortar to attack towers from their own side. Control decks aimed to defend efficiently and win through counter pushes. Cycle decks use cheap cards to constantly threaten and outpace opponents. The Valkyrie found homes in multiple archetypes, most prominently in control and beatdown strategies where her defensive reliability and ability to support pushes made her valuable. The community began creating content around Clash Royale, strategy guides and deck lists, YouTube videos analyzing gameplay, Reddit discussions about optimal strategies. The Valkyrie featured prominently in these early learning resources. Beginner guides would recommend her as a solid defensive card that functioned well at every trophy level. Intermediate guides would discuss her placement nuances, teaching players how positioning her one tile this way versus that way could determine whether she defended successfully or allowed damage through. Advanced guides would explore her role in specific matchups and how to maximize value from each Valkyrie deployment. Trophy pushing, the attempt to climb as high as possible on the competitive ladder, became a major focus for dedicated players. The Valkyrie was a common sight in trophy-pushing decks because she helped create the kind of consistent defensive performances necessary for winning the majority of your matches. You couldn't push to high trophies with inconsistent decks that sometimes won big but often lost badly. You needed reliability, and the Valkyrie delivered. She wasn't the star of trophy-pushing decks usually, but she was often a crucial supporting actor, the card that enabled your actual win condition to do its job by keeping your side of the arena clear of threats. The social aspect of Clash Royale, the ability to join clans, share replays, request card donations, and participate in clan wars, created communities of players who would discuss strategy and share discoveries. Within clans, experienced players would advise newcomers, and the Valkyrie featured in much of this advice. Make sure you have a spell, and the Valkyrie for swarms became common wisdom passed from veteran clan members to newer players. These clan communities helped disseminate knowledge about card interactions and strategic principles, accelerating the development of the collective understanding of the game. The first major balance update after soft launch came and went, and the Valkyrie remained largely unchanged, a testament to how well calibrated she was from the start. Some cards received significant buffs or nerfs, having proven too weak or too strong in actual play. The Valkyrie sat in that desirable middle ground where her usage rate was healthy, present in enough decks to matter, but not so dominant that she appeared in every single match. And her win rate was balanced, neither so high that she guaranteed victories nor so low that playing her was a disadvantage. This balanced sweet spot is the goal for every card, and the Valkyrie achieved it early and maintained it consistently. As spring turned to summer in 2016, and Clash Royale's worldwide release brought millions more players into the game, the meta continued evolving rapidly. New players brought fresh perspectives, some having never played Clash of Clans, approaching the game with completely different intuitions and strategies. The Valkyrie's usage patterns shifted with the influx of players, but she remained viable, adaptable to whatever the current popular strategies demanded. If the meta shifted toward ground-heavy compositions, she saw more play. If air units dominated for a period, her usage would dip but never disappear entirely, because even in air-heavy metas, players still needed answers to the ground threats that inevitably appeared. The psychological aspect of the Valkyrie's presence in the meta shouldn't be underestimated. Even when she wasn't in your deck, the possibility that your opponent had Valkyrie influenced your decisions. You might hesitate to play Skeleton Army too aggressively, knowing that Valkyrie could be waiting. You might adjust how you built your pushes, spreading troops out more to avoid giving a Valkyrie maximum value. This invisible pressure, the need to respect cards even when they aren't currently on the field, is part of Clash Royale's strategic depth. The Valkyrie created and still creates this pressure, forcing opponents to play more carefully, more thoughtfully, to consider whether this is the moment to commit resources or whether they should wait, conserving elixir for more favorable opportunities. The spinning death, combat style and abilities. To truly understand the Valkyrie's power and her role in Clash Royale, we must examine in detail the mechanics of her combat style. The spinning attack that defines her isn't just a visual flourish. It's a carefully designed mechanical system that creates unique gameplay opportunities and challenges. Every aspect, from the timing of her swings to the precise radius of her attacks to the damage values and health breakpoints, contributes to her place in the game's delicate balance. The 360-degree attack pattern is the most fundamental aspect of the Valkyrie's combat mechanics. Unlike most troops in Clash Royale who attack in front of them, dealing damage to whatever target they're currently facing. The Valkyrie hits everything within her melee range simultaneously. This is crucial to understand. When she swings her axe, it's not a targeted attack against one enemy. It's an area effect centered on her position. Every ground troop within range takes damage, regardless of direction. They could be in front of her, behind her, to her sides, it doesn't matter. If they're in range, they're taking damage. This mechanic makes her extraordinarily effective against multiple small units. A skeleton army consists of 15 skeletons. Against most single-target troops, those 15 skeletons deal their damage collectively, their DPS combining to quickly eliminate threats. Against the Valkyrie, their number doesn't help them. She hits all of them with each swing. One rotation of her axe can eliminate the entire army if they're clustered closely enough. Same principle applies to Goblin Gang, Minion Horde. Though minions are air units, so she can't actually hit them. But if they were ground troops, same concept, or any other swarm composition. The Valkyrie turns the swarm's number advantage into irrelevance. Her attack speed of 1.5 seconds means she completes a full axe rotation every 1.5 seconds. This timing is crucial for several reasons. First, it's fast enough that swarms don't have too much time to damage her between swings. If her attack speed were 2.5 seconds, even weak troops would deal significant damage in that interval. At 1.5 seconds, she gets attacks off quickly enough to minimize the damage she takes. Second, it's slow enough that opponents have a brief window to deploy additional troops between her swings. This creates skill-based interaction. A skilled player defending against Valkyrie can time their troop deployments to land right after she swings, giving their troops maximum time to damage her before her next swing. This timing creates micro-level gameplay depth. The damage per hit has been adjusted multiple times over Clash Royale's history, but it's always calibrated to achieve specific interactions at tournament standard levels, where card levels are normalized for fair competition. She should kill skeletons, bats, and spear goblins in 1 hit. She should kill goblins and archers in 2 hits. She should handle tanky swarm units like guards in 3 or 4 hits. These breakpoints matter enormously. If she required 2 hits to kill skeletons instead of 1, a skeleton army would deal double the damage to her before being eliminated. If she killed archers in 1 hit instead of 2, she'd be significantly stronger on defense. These damage values are calibrated with immense precision to create the desired gameplay balance. Her health pool sits in a similar zone of careful calibration. She needs to survive certain amounts and types of damage to fulfill her role. She should survive a direct hit from Fireball spell, though it should significantly weaken her. She should tank multiple strikes from small units while she eliminates them. She should be able to walk through one tower's damage for a reasonable period. Not long enough to take the tower down herself, but long enough to support a push. But she shouldn't be so tanky that she becomes unkillable. Air troops should be able to focus fire on her and eliminate her before she crosses the arena. High-damage single-target troops like Prince or Mini P.E.K.K.A. should be able to take her down without too much difficulty if they can isolate her. The range of her attacks is deceptively important. She has melee range, meaning troops have to be very close to her to take damage. But that melee range extends in all directions, creating a circular danger zone around her position. This zone is why placement matters so much with Valkyrie. If you place her 1 or 2 tiles away from where enemies are approaching, she might not engage them immediately, having to walk into range, potentially allowing them to slip past or deal damage to your tower. But if you place her directly on top of approaching troops, she immediately begins her spinning assault, maximizing her effectiveness. This placement precision separates mediocre Valkyrie players from skilled ones. Understanding exactly where to drop her in different situations requires experience and spatial awareness. Against a ground push coming down one lane, you want to place her in the center of the approaching group to hit as many units as possible with each swing. Against split lane pressure, you might need to place her to cover one lane while other defenders handle the second lane. Against building targeting troops with support units behind them, you want to place her in a position where she doesn't chase the tank but instead engages the support troops, clearing them while your tower damages the tank. The Valkyrie's target selection follows a specific priority system. She doesn't target buildings, only attacking enemy troops. When multiple enemy troops are in range, she doesn't choose between them. Her area attack hits all of them simultaneously. But when no troops are in her immediate range and multiple enemies are at different distances, she walks toward whichever target is closest. This can sometimes lead to suboptimal pathing if the closest target is a less important one. But it's also predictable, allowing skilled players to manipulate her movement by carefully positioning units to pull her in desired directions. Her movement speed is classified as medium, the same as cards like Knight, Valkyrie, and many others. This speed creates specific timing windows in gameplay. From the moment she's deployed to the moment she reaches enemy towers takes a predictable amount of time. Players can internalize these timings, knowing roughly when a Valkyrie will arrive, when they need to deploy defensive troops to intercept her, when their own supporting troops will catch up to her if they deploy them afterward. Medium speed is also slow enough that fast-moving threat cards like Prince, Ram Rider, or Hog Rider can outpace her, requiring different defensive solutions. The interaction between the Valkyrie and Crown Towers, the main towers you're trying to defend and destroy, is carefully tuned. A Valkyrie by herself attacking a tower won't take it down. She doesn't deal enough damage quickly enough, and the tower's DPS will eliminate her before she deals critical damage. But she can chip away at tower health, and if supported by other troops, or if the opponent is low on elixir and can't defend properly, she can contribute meaningful damage. More importantly, her presence on offense forces defensive reactions. Opponents have to address her, which creates opportunities for your other cards to exploit. The spinning animation itself is mesmerizing and serves gameplay purposes beyond just looking cool. It provides clear visual communication. You can tell at a glance whether the Valkyrie is attacking or simply walking. When she's spinning, she's in combat mode, dealing damage to everything around her. When she's walking normally, she hasn't engaged enemies yet. This visual clarity helps players parse complex battlefield situations quickly. In the chaos of a battle with multiple troops from both sides, being able to instantly identify which troops are attacking and which are moving to position is crucial information. The opera singing that accompanies her attacks adds auditory communication to the visual signals. You can hear when a Valkyrie is fighting, even if you're focused on another part of the battlefield. This audio cue helps with battlefield awareness, letting you know that combat is happening in that location without needing to directly watch it every second. The choice of operatic singing specifically is both characterful and practical. It's distinctive, unlike the sounds made by other troops, ensuring you won't confuse Valkyrie's audio signature with anyone else's. And it ties back to the Wagner Ride of the Valkyries reference, connecting the character to her mythological and cultural roots. The physics of her spin, in the abstracted game logic sense, rather than realistic physics, creates interesting interactions with knockback effects. If a bowler's rolling boulder hits a Valkyrie, she gets knocked back but continues spinning. If a Mega Knight lands on her, she gets pushed away but doesn't stop attacking. She can't be stunned by electro effects like Electro Wizard or Zap Spell, at least not in the sense of stopping her from attacking. These resistance properties make her reliable. Once deployed and engaged, she's going to do her job. Opponents can't easily interrupt or disable her. Her interaction with building placement creates advanced strategic layers. Buildings in Clash Royale can be placed in various positions to pull troops, changing their pathing and causing them to walk toward the building instead of toward towers. The Valkyrie can be pulled by buildings, but because she doesn't prioritize buildings and only attacks them when no enemy troops are present. A building alone won't effectively counter her. She destroyed the building eventually, but if there are enemy troops around, she engaged them instead. This makes her somewhat resistant to being kited, pulled around the arena away from meaningful targets, compared to troops that specifically chase buildings. The concept of spell value is crucial in Clash Royale. Using a spell efficiently means hitting multiple enemy troops or dealing damage to troops plus a tower. The Valkyrie factors into spell value calculations in interesting ways. She's tanky enough that using a medium-cost spell like Fireball on her alone is often poor value. You spend 4 elixir to damage, but not kill a 4 elixir troop. But if your opponent groups multiple troops together and your Fireball hits several of them plus deals chip damage to a tower, that's sufficient. The Valkyrie's presence actually improves the spell value your opponent can get if you're not careful about how you support her. Placing all your troops in a tight cluster around her makes them vulnerable to fireball or poison spells that hit everything at once. Spreading your push out, keeping some distance between supporting troops and your Valkyrie makes you more spell resistant. Understanding damage types helps explain the Valkyrie's effectiveness. Clash Royale has several damage categories. Single target, most troops. Area, Valkyrie, Wizard, Bomber, and Chain Splash patterns. Electro Wizard, Sparky. Area damage means the Valkyrie can't be overwhelmed by numbers alone. Where a single target troop like Mini P.E.K.K.A. would face the combined DPS of every surrounding enemy, taking massive damage quickly, the Valkyrie faces the same DPS but dishes out her damage to all of them simultaneously, evening the exchange. This is why she survives swarms that would shred other troops. The counterplay to Valkyrie is understanding her vulnerabilities and exploiting them. Air troops are the most obvious counter. She can't hit them, so units like Minions, Mega Minion, Baby Dragon, or Inferno Dragon can attack her freely. She has no answer except to tank their damage until she dies. High damage single target troops can eliminate her quickly if they can engage without her support troops interfering. Mini P.E.K.K.A., Prince, especially with his charge, or even a well-supported knight can take her down. Ranged troops with proper positioning can damage her while staying out of her melee range. Musketeer, Magic Archer, or Electro Wizard placed smartly can chip her health from safety. Buildings that deal damage, like Inferno Tower or Tesla, can handle Valkyrie effectively. She attacked the building while it damages her, and since buildings typically have considerable health and decent DPS, the Valkyrie won't win that exchange. This makes buildings a reliable, if somewhat elixir-expensive answer to Valkyrie pushes. Swarm troops can work against Valkyrie if you have multiple wave of them. One skeleton army dies to her spin, but if you can follow up with bats or goblins immediately after, you can overwhelm her through successive waves. The key is not giving her time to recover between engagements, not allowing her to clear one threat and then march forward at full health to engage the next. Sustained pressure from multiple sources can eventually break through her defenses. The Valkyrie's effectiveness scales with level, as all cards do in Clash Royale. Higher levels mean more health and more damage, which shifts the breakpoints mentioned earlier. An over-leveled Valkyrie can survive interactions that should kill her at equal levels. She might tank an additional tower shot, survive with a sliver of health when she should have died, one-shot troops that should require 2 hits. This is why card levels matter so much in ladder play outside of tournament standard. An opponent with a level 14 Valkyrie facing your level 11 troops has a significant mathematical advantage. Understanding these level interactions and knowing when you're at a disadvantage helps you make better strategic decisions, perhaps avoiding fights you can't win and focusing on exploiting other opportunities. The emotional and psychological experience of using Valkyrie effectively is deeply satisfying. There is something viscerally pleasing about dropping her on a massive swarm and watching every enemy unit vanish in one spinning motion. It feels powerful, efficient, like you've perfectly solved a problem. The game's feedback systems reinforce this satisfaction. The sound of her axe connecting, the visual effect of units dying, the operatic battle cry, all combine to create a rewarding sensory experience. Good game design makes correct plays feel good, and the Valkyrie exemplifies this principle. Conversely, misplaying the Valkyrie feels bad in instructive ways. If you place her poorly, and she walks past the troops you wanted her to kill, if you deploy her a moment too late, and your tower takes unnecessary damage, if you use her against the wrong threat, and she accomplishes nothing, these failures teach through negative feedback. You remember the mistakes because they hurt. This pain is pedagogical. It trains you to be more careful, more precise, more thoughtful about when and where to deploy your 4 elixir. Over time, through repeated success and failure, players develop intuition about Valkyrie usage. They stop thinking consciously about exact tile placement and start reacting instinctively, their hands moving to the right position before their conscious mind fully processes why. This is mastery, the transformation of knowledge into instinct. The synergy between the Valkyrie and various spell cards creates interesting tactical options. Using her with freeze spell can be devastating. She engages multiple enemy troops, and then freeze locks them in place while she continues spinning, eliminating them before they can react or retreat. Pairing her with rage spell increases her attack speed and movement speed, letting her mouth through defenses faster. Tornado spell can pull spread out enemy troops into a cluster around her, letting her hit everything simultaneously instead of chasing them one by one. These spell combinations require additional elixir investment, but can create overwhelming advantages in specific situations. The Valkyrie's role in various deck archetypes deserves exploration. In beatdown decks built around heavy tanks like Golem or Giant, she serves as support, protecting the tank from swarms and area damage troops that would normally defend efficiently against big, slow pushes. She walks behind the tank, clearing defenders, ensuring the tank reaches the tower with support troops intact. In control decks, focused on efficient defense and counter pushes, she's a defensive anchor, the reliable answer to ground swarms that lets you defend efficiently and then transition surviving troops into offense. In bridge spam decks that apply constant pressure at both bridges, she can be part of the spam, a tanky threat that demands an answer while your other cards attack from different angles. Cycle decks, which use cheap cards to quickly rotate back to their win condition, sometimes include Valkyrie, despite her 4 elixir cost being higher than ideal for pure cycle. She provides necessary defensive stability in decks that otherwise might struggle against swarms. The cycle principle is playing cards quickly to get back to your key card, maybe a Hog Rider or Mire, but you need to survive while cycling. And the Valkyrie helps ensure you don't take massive damage from swarm rushes while you're reworking through your deck rotation. The Valkyrie's matchup against specific meta decks shifts with the meta itself. Against log bait decks that use Princess, Goblin Barrel, and Goblin Gang to bait out your log spell and then overwhelm you with swarms, the Valkyrie provides a second answer to ground swarms, making the deck more resilient. Against graveyard decks that spawn skeletons around your tower, she can clear those skeletons effectively if positioned correctly, though Poison Spell is usually the primary answer. Against bridge spam, she can stop the spam troops at the bridge, preventing them from reaching your tower and creating positive elixir traits. Against beatdown, she's useful but not a complete answer. She handles the support troops accompanying the tank, but can't kill the tank itself efficiently. She works in combination with other defensive tools, buildings that distract the tank while she eliminates supports, or high-damage troops that focus the tank while she cleans up everything else. Against siege, where opponents use X-Bow or mortar to attack your towers from distance, The Valkyrie can tank shots from the siege building while you deal with it, or she can clear defensive troops protecting the siege engine. She's versatile in this matchup, useful but not single-handedly decisive. The concept of baiting is important in competitive Clash Royale. If your opponent uses their Valkyrie on defense early in the match, you know they won't have her available again for several seconds based on card cycle. In those moments, you can play swarm troops more aggressively, knowing their best answer isn't in hand. This meta-level thinking, tracking what cards your opponent has played and estimating what they can play next, elevates gameplay from reactive to strategic. You're not just responding to what's on the battlefield. You're predicting what could be on the battlefield and playing around those possibilities. The Valkyrie's training and upgrade path in Clash Royale requires specific resources. She's a rare card, the middle rarity tier. Commons are most plentiful, rares are moderately common, epics are rare, and legendaries are very rare. As a rare, she's easier to upgrade than epic or legendary cards, but requires more investment than commons. Players need to collect her from chests, purchase her from the shop using golden gems, or request her from clanmates. Upgrading her improves her statistics progressively, each level adding health and damage. Max level Valkyrie represents significant time and resource investment, marking a player's commitment to using her long-term. The star level system, a cosmetic progression that doesn't affect card statistics, lets players show off their mastery of specific cards. Earning star levels for Valkyrie requires having her maxed and then continuing to collect her cards or spending resources specifically on star upgrades. Star levels add visual effects, subtle cosmetic changes that distinguish maxed cards. For the Valkyrie, star levels add golden decorative elements to her armor and weapon, signaling to opponents that this player has deep experience with this card. It's a badge of honor, a way to communicate dedication. The mathematical underpinnings of the Valkyrie's balance involve complex calculations that Supercell's balance team constantly monitors. They track usage rates across different trophy ranges and tournament play. They analyze win rates when she's in a deck versus when she's not. They look at matchup-specific data, how she performs against different deck archetypes. They examine elixir trade efficiency, measuring whether the average Valkyrie deployment generates positive, neutral, or negative value. All this data informs balanced decisions, small adjustments to her stats that keep her viable but not oppressive. The Valkyrie has been buffed and nerfed multiple times across Clash Royale's history, always in small increments. A 5% health increase here, a 3% damage decrease there. Tiny changes that seem insignificant but compound across thousands of interactions to meaningfully shift her power level. These micro-adjustments are preferable to dramatic overhauls that would fundamentally change how the card functions. Players develop muscle memory and intuition with cards. Maintaining the core functionality while fine-tuning the numbers preserves that familiarity while keeping balance healthy. Evolution through the years. Balance changes and meta shifts. The story of the Valkyrie in Clash Royale is not a static one. Like all cards in this constantly evolving game, she has been shaped and reshaped by the hands of balance designers, responding to the ever-changing meta, player feedback, and the introduction of new cards that alter the strategic landscape. To understand her journey from January 2016 through to late 2024 and into 2025 is to understand the philosophy of live service game development, where nothing remains unchanged for long, where yesterday's dominant strategy becomes today's forgotten relic, and where cards must constantly prove their continued relevance or risk obsolescence. The first significant balance change affecting Valkyrie came in March 2016, just months after launch. This wasn't a direct stat change to her specifically, but rather a broader adjustment to how the game calculated attack ranges and radii. These seemingly technical changes had real impacts on her effectiveness, altering the precise positioning required for optimal play and slightly shifting her interaction patterns with other troops. Players had to recalibrate their muscle memory, adjusting to the new range calculations, learning fresh placement patterns that maximized her area damage. In July 2016, Supercell implemented a balance patch that reduced the Valkyrie's hit points by 5%. This nerf was a direct response to her outsized presence in the meta at that time. She had become too reliable, appearing in too many decks across too many different strategies. The 5% health reduction meant she died slightly faster to tower damage, survived fewer hits from major threats, and could be overwhelmed by swarms more easily if not supported properly. The change wasn't dramatic enough to destroy her viability, but it opened up slightly more counterplay, gave opponents more options for dealing with her effectively. The September 2016 update brought the Valkyrie a buff, increasing her hit points by 5%. This essentially reversed the July nerf, but it came after months of meta evolution. New cards had been released, strategies had developed, and what had been too strong in July was now appropriately powerful in September. This illustrates an important principle of live balance. Changes aren't made in a vacuum. What's balanced depends entirely on context, on what other cards exist, what strategies are popular, what the player base has learned and adapted to. A card can receive the exact same stats back that were previously problematic, and those stats can now be perfectly fine because everything around them has changed. December 2016 brought another balance patch, and this time the Valkyrie received a 4% damage increase. Her health had been adjusted multiple times, but her damage output had remained relatively stable. The increase made her slightly more threatening offensively, allowing her to deal meaningful chip damage to towers more effectively and killing certain troops in one fewer hit at specific level interactions. This damage boost came at a time when defensive structures and spells were very popular in the meta, making offensive troops need every advantage they could get to push through heavy defensive setups. The year 2017 brought new challenges for the Valkyrie with the introduction of several cards that complicated her role. The Executioner, released in January, provided a ranged area damage option that could handle swarms from safety, competing with Valkyrie for deck slots and compositions that needed swarm clear. The Bats card, cheap flying swarm troops, became popular and were a threat the Valkyrie couldn't address. The Night Witch, controversial on release, spawned bats constantly, creating situations where ground-based area damage like Valkyrie struggled to provide complete answers. A significant rework came in June 2017 when Supercell adjusted the Valkyrie's initial attack time, the delay between deployment and her first axe swing. They reduced this initial attack delay significantly, making her engage threats faster when dropped. This change made her more responsive, more effective at immediately shutting down swarms upon deployment. Previously, there was a longer wind-up time where swarms could deal substantial damage before her first spin. The reduced delay made her much more reliable as a reactive defensive tool. October 2017 brought a balance change that affected many troops' retargeting systems, and the Valkyrie was among them. The changes made troops less likely to retarget to different enemies mid-attack, creating more predictable behavior. For the Valkyrie, this meant her pathing became slightly more consistent, less prone to the weird wandering that sometimes occurred when enemies were entering and leaving her range rapidly. The year 2018 saw the Valkyrie settling into a comfortable position in the meta. She received minor adjustments throughout the year, nothing dramatic, mostly fine-tuning in response to shifting meta conditions. A small health buff in March, a tiny damage adjustment in August. These incremental changes kept her viable without making her oppressive. This period demonstrated successful balancing, where a card remains relevant and sees healthy play without dominating the landscape. In 2019, the challenge came from new card releases that changed what strategies were viable. The Wall Breakers provided a cheap way to deal massive building damage, changing how players approach defense. The Earthquake spell offered a unique answer to building heavy defenses. The Elixir Golem created new beatdown possibilities. Through all these additions, the Valkyrie maintained relevance by remaining a flexible, reliable tool that fit into multiple strategies. She was never the star of new meta decks, but she was frequently a supporting actor, a solid defensive presence that enabled other cards to shine. The year 2020 brought the Heal Spirit and Royal Delivery, cards that created new defensive tools and offensive possibilities. The meta shifted toward faster cycle times and more reactive play. The Valkyrie adapted, seeing play in decks that needed her defensive stability, but coupling her with cheaper cycle cards that allowed rapid rotation. This demonstrated her flexibility, her ability to function in faster-paced strategies, even though she herself wasn't a cheap cycle card. The introduction of champions in 2021, special powerful cards that added new mechanics to the game, created another meta shift. The Valkyrie had to prove her worth alongside these flashy new additions. She did so by remaining fundamentally reliable. Champions were exciting and powerful, but they were also expensive and specialized. The Valkyrie's 4 elixir cost and general purpose swarm clearing gave her a place in decks even alongside champions, providing the defensive foundation that let players use their elixir on more specialized threats. Throughout 2022 and 2023, the Valkyrie continued receiving minor adjustments, never anything dramatic. Always small percentage changes to health or damage that kept her calibrated to the current state of the game. These years saw her usage rates fluctuate with meta shifts. When swarm-heavy strategies like Skeleton King decks or Mighty Mire cycles dominated, Valkyrie usage spiked as players sought reliable swarm answers. When air-heavy metas developed around Lava Hound or Balloon strategies, her usage dipped as players prioritized anti-air options. One significant consideration throughout her balance history has been her interaction with overleveling on ladder. Because the Valkyrie is a rare card, she's relatively easier to upgrade to max level compared to epics or legendaries. This means that in lower to mid-trophy ranges, many players have maxed or near-maxed Valkyries, while their other cards lag behind. An overleveled Valkyrie can feel oppressive to face, surviving interactions she shouldn't, killing troops in fewer hits than she should, essentially functioning as a more powerful version than her stats at tournament standard would suggest. Balanced designers have had to consider this reality, ensuring that at tournament standard where she's balanced, she's not completely broken when overleveled in ladder play. The community response to Valkyrie balance changes has generally been measured. She's not a controversial card that generates heated debates. Players understand her role, appreciate her reliability, and generally accept adjustments as necessary for overall game health. There have been no riots demanding buffs, no mass outcries about nerfs. This calm community reception reflects the Valkyrie's position as a well-designed, well-understood card that serves clear purposes without generating controversy. The professional scene has consistently featured the Valkyrie at various times across Clash Royale's competitive history. Major tournaments would see her in anywhere from 20 to 40% of decks, depending on the current meta. She was never universally included like some cards have been during their dominant periods, but she was always present, always an option for players who valued defensive reliability. Professional players have praised her consistency, noting that in high-stakes matches where one mistake costs you everything, having dependable defensive tools matters more than flashy high-risk strategies. The content creator community has produced countless videos and guides about the Valkyrie over the years. From basic how-to guides for beginners to advanced placement tutorials for competitive players, she's been a constant subject of educational content. Her straightforward mechanics make her accessible to teach, but her nuanced positioning and timing create enough depth for advanced discussion. This combination of accessibility and depth is part of what makes her such an enduring part of the game. The seasonal balance changes that Supercell implements every few months have become the rhythm by which Clash Royale players experience the game's evolution. Each balance update brings anticipation, speculation, analysis. The Valkyrie sometimes features in these updates, sometimes doesn't. When she does receive changes, it's news but rarely shocking news. Valkyrie health increased by 3% is the kind of measured adjustment that keeps the game healthy without upending everything players know. It is the kind of change that matters in aggregate across millions of matches, but doesn't fundamentally transform how the card is played. The introduction of the evolution system in late 2023 and early 2024 represented one of the most significant additions to Clash Royale since its launch. Evolutions provide upgraded versions of existing cards with enhanced abilities and new mechanics. When the Valkyrie received her evolution in January 2024, it opened an entirely new chapter in her story, one that we'll explore in depth in the next section. Looking back across 8+ years of balance history, the Valkyrie's journey illustrates successful game design and maintenance. She has remained relevant without ever becoming problematic for extended periods. She has adapted to new cards, new strategies, new mechanics without requiring fundamental reworks that would alien players who had mastered her. She has served as a benchmark for what a well-balanced card looks like. Not too strong, not too weak. Fulfilling a clear role while leaving space for other cards to shine. The balance philosophy evident in the Valkyrie's history is one of incremental adjustment rather than radical overhaul. This approach respects player investment, both the time spent mastering the card and the resources spent upgrading it. When players invest in a card, they deserve to have that investment remain valuable even as balance shifts. The Valkyrie has honored that implicit contract. Players who upgraded her in 2016 can still play her effectively in 2025. Her core functionality hasn't changed. She still spins, still clears swarms, still provides defensive reliability. The numbers have shifted, the meta context has evolved, but the fundamental character of the card remains true to its original design. This consistency across change is perhaps the Valkyrie's greatest testament as a card design. In a game that has added over 100 cards since launch, that has introduced numerous new mechanics and systems, that has undergone countless meta shifts and strategy revolutions, the Valkyrie has remained herself. Spinning her axe, singing her opera, clearing the swarms that dare approach your towers. She is, in many ways, the eternal guardian, unchanged in essence, even as the world around her constantly transforms. The Valkyrie evolution, a new era of power, January 2024, marked a pivotal moment in the Valkyrie story with the introduction of her evolution. The evolution system had been added to Clash Royale in late 2023, providing upgraded versions of existing cards with enhanced abilities that went beyond simple stat increases. These weren't just stronger versions of familiar cards. They were transformations, adding new mechanics and abilities that created fresh strategic possibilities. When the Valkyrie's turn came to receive an evolution, players anticipated eagerly, wondering what new power would be granted to their spinning warrior. The evolved Valkyrie introduced the whirlwind ability, and it fundamentally changed how she functioned on the battlefield. Upon evolution activation, she doesn't just spin her axe faster or hit harder, though she does gain improved stats. She creates a tornado effect, a pulling vortex that draws in nearby enemy ground troops, clustering them around her for devastating area damage. This mechanic transforms her from a defensive counter against swarms into an active threat that can manipulate enemy positioning, pulling spread-out troops into kill range, disrupting enemy formations, and creating chaos in what should be organized pushes. The whirlwind ability activates automatically when the evolved Valkyrie is played, creating an immediate pull effect in a radius around her deployment position. Ground troops within range are sucked toward her location, often clustering multiple enemies that had been strategically positioned at different distances. This clustering makes her area damage exponentially more effective. Where a regular Valkyrie might need to chase down spread out troops one by one, the evolved Valkyrie forces them to come to her, to gather in the perfect formation for her spinning axe to eliminate them efficiently. The strategic implications of this pulling mechanic are profound. It makes the evolved Valkyrie incredibly effective against kiting strategies, where opponents try to pull your troops away from meaningful targets by placing units that draw aggro and run away. The whirlwind prevents successful kiting by pulling those kiting units back into engagement range. It disrupts split push strategies, where opponents attack both lanes simultaneously, by pulling troops from a wider area into one concentrated location. It punishes spread formations that would normally minimize area damage effectiveness. The visual effect of the whirlwind is dramatic and satisfying. Wind swirls visibly around the evolved Valkyrie, debris and small particles circling her as enemies are pulled inward. It's immediately clear when you're facing an evolution rather than a standard Valkyrie, both from the visual effects and from the sudden repositioning of your troops. This clarity is important for counterplay. Players need to recognize immediately that they're facing an evolution so they can adjust their strategy accordingly. The audio design enhances the impact of the evolution. The familiar operatic battle cry becomes more intense, layered with wind sound effects that emphasize the tornado mechanic. The combination of visual and audio feedback creates a powerful, almost overwhelming sensory experience that marks the evolved Valkyrie as a significant threat requiring immediate attention. This sensory intensity is intentional, creating emotional weight around what is mechanically a very powerful ability. The balance considerations for evolved Valkyrie were delicate. Evolution cards need to feel significantly more powerful than their base versions to justify the additional resource investment and deck building commitment required to play them. But they can't be so powerful that they become auto-include must-have cards that everyone needs, or they can compete. The evolved Valkyrie walks this balance line by being extremely strong in specific situations against ground swarms and spread formations, while remaining vulnerable to the same counters that work against regular Valkyrie air troops, high single target damage, ranged attackers. The resource requirements to obtain and upgrade evolutions ensure they remain prestigious additions to a player's collection. You need to have the base card maxed before you can even unlock evolution capability. Then you need to collect evolution shards, a special resource earned through various game modes and events. The time and effort required means not every player has access to evolutions immediately, creating a progression goal and reward structure that gives dedicated players something to work toward. The deck building implications of including evolved Valkyrie are significant. You can only have one evolution card active in your deck at a time, forcing players to choose which evolution they want to build around. If you're using evolved Valkyrie, you're giving up the possibility of using evolved Firecracker, evolved Skeletons, or any other evolution. This opportunity cost means deck construction must be intentional. You're not just throwing evolved Valkyrie into any deck. You're building specifically to maximize her value, to create situations where her pulling ability provides maximum advantage. Synergies with evolved Valkyrie open new tactical possibilities. Pairing her with splash damage troops like Wizard or Bomber creates a killing field where pulled enemies are hit by multiple area effects simultaneously. Combining her with high damage single target troops like Mini P.E.K.K.A. means she pulls enemies into range of your heavy hitters while clearing support troops herself. Using her with Tornado Spell compounds the pulling effect, dragging enemies from even further away and keeping them clustered for extended periods. The counterplay against evolved Valkyrie requires adapted strategies. Air troops become even more valuable because the whirlwind only affects ground units. Flying machines, minions, baby dragons, these cards can attack the evolved Valkyrie without risk of being pulled. Building placement becomes more important. using structures to distract her away from your main defensive troops, preventing her from pulling your entire defense into a clustered disaster. Spread formations become risky, sometimes requiring you to commit defenders more cautiously, one or two at a time, rather than deploying multiple troops simultaneously that could all be pulled together. The psychological impact of facing evolved Valkyrie shouldn't be underestimated. There's a moment of concern, sometimes bordering on panic, when that evolution hits the field and your troops suddenly get yanked out of position. It disrupts your plans, forces you to recalculate on the fly, creates pressure and urgency that can lead to mistakes if you're not mentally prepared. Managing this psychological pressure is part of mastering play against evolutions. You need to recognize them immediately, stay calm, and execute the appropriate counter strategy without panicking and over-committing elixir. The meta impact of evolved Valkyrie's release created waves through competitive Clash Royale. Suddenly, decks needed to account for this pulling mechanic. Ground-heavy strategies became riskier. Swarm tactics required more careful execution. Players experimented with Evolution Valkyrie in various deck archetypes, finding homes for her in control decks that could use her improved defensive capabilities, in beatdown strategies where she protected massive pushes even more effectively, and in bridge spam compositions where her pulling ability could disrupt defenders attempting to establish position. Tournament play saw evolved Valkyrie appear with moderate frequency, not overwhelming the scene but certainly making her presence felt. Professional players appreciated her ability to create high-impact plays, moments where the whirlwind pool set up devastating combinations that could swing matches. But they also recognized her vulnerabilities, the way skilled opponents could play around the pull, the air-heavy compositions that could exploit her ground-only limitation. She became part of the meta conversation, a tool in the competitive toolkit rather than a dominant force that warped the entire competitive landscape. The evolution system itself represented Supercell's commitment to keeping Clash Royale fresh and exciting years after launch. By adding meaningful new mechanics to familiar cards, they created progression goals for veteran players who had already maxed their collections. The evolved Valkyrie exemplifies this philosophy, taking a card players had used for years and giving it new life, new strategic depth, new reasons to include her in decks. It rewarded loyalty to the card, giving players who had always loved Valkyrie an exciting new version to master. The community response to evolved Valkyrie was generally positive, though with the usual balance concerns that accompany any powerful new addition. Some players felt she was too strong initially, that the pulling mechanic provided too much value. Others argued she was perfectly balanced, pointing to her clear counters and specific situational effectiveness. The debate itself indicated healthy engagement, players caring enough about the game to discuss and analyze new additions, to theorize about optimal strategies and counterplay. Content creators produced extensive coverage of evolved Valkyrie, from showcase videos demonstrating the whirlwind ability to analytical deep dives exploring her impact on the meta to deck-building guides centered around maximizing her effectiveness. The education resources available help players understand how to use and counter the evolution, spreading knowledge through the community and raising the overall skill level of play. This content ecosystem around major additions like evolutions is part of what keeps Clash Royale vital, creating conversations and shared learning experiences that bind the community together. The long-term place of evolved Valkyrie in Clash Royale's card ecosystem remains a topic of ongoing adjustment and discussion. As new cards release and the meta continues evolving, her relative power level shifts. What seems overpowered in one meta becomes balanced in the next when strategies adapt and new counters emerge. The dynamic nature of a live service game means no card, no matter how powerful at release, maintains dominance indefinitely. The meta shifts, players adapt, and balance changes ensure that variety remains possible. Looking at the evolution through the lens of the Valkyrie's complete history, from her Norse mythology origins, through her Clash of Clans implementation to her years in Clash Royale, and finally to this evolution, we see a character who has constantly adapted while maintaining core identity. She spins, she sings, she clears swarms. These fundamentals remain true. The evolution simply adds another layer, another tool, another expression of that spinning warrior identity. It's growth, but it's growth that honors the foundation rather than abandoning it. Defensive mastery, the shield of the arena. If there is one role that defines the Valkyrie above all others, one purpose that captures her essential nature in Clash Royale, it is defense. While she can certainly contribute to offensive pushes and has her place in aggressive strategies, her truest calling is standing before your towers. Axe spinning, voice singing, bodies falling around her as she denies the enemy their advance. Understanding the Valkyrie as a defensive card, mastering the specific techniques and strategies that make her excel in this role, is fundamental to appreciating her place in Clash Royale's strategic ecosystem. The defensive philosophy embodied by the Valkyrie is one of stability and reliability. In a game where flashy offensive plays often steal the spotlight, where dramatic tower demolitions and clever tactical strikes get the glory, defense is the unsung foundation upon which victory is built. You cannot win Clash Royale matches without defending effectively. Your towers must survive long enough for your offense to succeed. The Valkyrie provides this survival. She is the bulwark against ground swarms, the answer to multiple medium threats, the card that says, "Not today," to enemy pushes that would otherwise overwhelm you. Against Skeleton Army, the Valkyrie performs what might be her most iconic defensive interaction. 15 skeletons surround your tower. Their collective damage per second substantial enough to destroy supporting troops or chip significant health from your tower if left unopposed. Drop the Valkyrie directly on top of the army, and one spin of her axe eliminates every skeleton simultaneously. The trade is favorable. 4 elixirs spent to counter 3, and your Valkyrie survives at full health, ready to counter-push or defend against follow-up attacks. This interaction is so fundamental to Clash Royale that new players learn it early, often in their first few matches. It teaches the principle of area damage versus swarms, illustrating through immediate practical example why splash damage troops are valuable. Against Goblin Gang, the Valkyrie performs similarly but with a slight complication. The gang includes both spear goblins, ranged, and stab goblins, melee, and they spread out as they approach. A perfectly placed Valkyrie can eliminate all 6 with 1 or 2 spins, but poor placement might let the ranged goblin survive at the edges of her range, continuing to peck away at your tower. This interaction teaches placement precision, showing that not all defensive deployments are equal. The tile-perfect positioning separates adequate defense from optimal defense. Against barbarians, the Valkyrie shows both her strengths and limitations. 4 barbarians rushing your tower represent significant threat. Left uncontested, they'll shred your tower quickly. The Valkyrie can handle them, her area damage hitting all 4 with each spin, but they're tanky enough that it takes multiple hits to eliminate them. Meanwhile, their combined DPS damages her significantly. She win the fight if nothing else interferes, but she'd be heavily weakened afterward. This teaches the lesson that the Valkyrie isn't invincible, that even matchups where she theoretically counters the enemy still require support. Tower damage helping to kill the barbarians faster, or a support troop providing additional DPS, can make the difference between a Valkyrie surviving healthy enough to counterpush and a Valkyrie barely limping away from the engagement. Against elite barbarians, those faster, more expensive, harder-hitting cousins of regular barbarians, the Valkyrie struggles more. They'll damage her substantially, even as she tries to take them down. This is an interaction where the Valkyrie alone isn't sufficient. She needs help, needs your tower focused on them, needs perhaps a second troop contributing damage or a spell weakening them. Understanding when the Valkyrie is and isn't sufficient alone is crucial defensive knowledge. Against minion horde, the Valkyrie can do nothing. 6 flying minions descend on your tower, and your ground-locked spinning warrior is helpless to stop them. This limitation is fundamental to her design and crucial to understand. She specializes in ground defense, making her extremely effective in that role but completely ineffective against air. This creates interesting deck-building challenges. If you include Valkyrie for swarm defense, you absolutely need anti-air options as well. Arrows, fireball, or anti-air troops like Musketeer or Mega Minion become necessary complements. Against support troops behind a tank, the Valkyrie excels. A giant lumbers toward your tower with a wizard behind him shooting fireballs, or with a witch spawning skeletons, or with a musketeer providing ranged damage. The tank itself is your tower's problem, or possibly a building's problem. The Valkyrie's job is eliminating everything else. She walks into the support troops, spins her axe, and within seconds, the giant is marching alone, much easier to handle. This interaction demonstrates her role in the broader defensive ecosystem. She's not a universal answer. She's a specialist that handles ground support exceptionally well, allowing other defensive tools to focus on their specialties. Against Graveyard Spell, which spawns skeletons directly around your tower, placement becomes everything. The Valkyrie needs to be positioned where the skeletons appear, spinning constantly to kill them as they spawn. But Graveyard is cast on your tower, which means placing Valkyrie there puts her in tower damage range, taking hits from your own tower if you're not careful with exact positioning. The best placement is just barely within range of where skeletons spawn, but not so close to your tower that she takes tower damage. This interaction teaches advanced placement skills and timing, as you often need to predict the graveyard and pre-place the Valkyrie rather than waiting for the spell to land. Against Goblin Barrel, 3 goblins landing directly on your tower, the Valkyrie can work, but isn't ideal. She killed them if placed immediately, but her initial attack delay means they'll get several hits on your tower first. Spells like Zap or Log are better answers. But in situations where you've already used your spell, or if the barrel is part of a larger push where you need the Valkyrie to handle accompanying ground troops, she serves as a backup answer to the barrel, not optimal but functional when necessary. This flexibility, being able to serve as a secondary answer to threats, even when she's not the ideal counter, adds to her defensive value. Against bridge spam pressure, where opponents rapidly deploy troops at the bridge, attempting to overwhelm you before you can properly respond, the Valkyrie provides critical stability. A battle ram charges forward with bandit behind it, or a royal ghost phases in with supporting troops. The Valkyrie deployed at the bridge intercepts this pressure, her area damage clearing multiple threats while her health pool absorbs the initial burst. She slows the spam, gives you time to think and deploy additional defenders, prevents the snowball effect where one successful bridge spam leads to tower damage that leads to desperation defending that leads to more tower damage. The concept of King Tower activation is an advanced defensive technique in Clash Royale where you intentionally let enemy troops hit your King Tower, the center tower that doesn't normally activate until one of your Princess Towers falls, causing it to wake up and start attacking. Once activated, your King Tower provides additional defensive firepower for the rest of the match, making defense significantly easier. The Valkyrie can be used in King activation techniques, particularly against troops with long attack ranges or projectiles that can be manipulated. While she's not the primary tool for King activation, understanding how she fits into these advanced defensive strategies is part of mastery. Spacing and positioning take on special importance with Valkyrie defense. The difference between placing her 1 tile forward versus 1 tile back, directly on top of approaching troops versus slightly in front of them in the center of your side versus closer to one lane, these seemingly minor positioning choices create dramatic differences in outcomes. Optimal placement clusters enemy troops in her area damage range while keeping her far enough from your tower that she doesn't block your tower as line of sight to threats. It positions her to intercept follow-up deployments while defending against the current push. It considers where she'll be after this engagement ends, whether she'll be positioned to transition into a counter push, or whether she'll need to be cycled out of rotation. The timing of Valkyrie deployment separates good defensive play from excellent defensive play. Deploy her too early, and opponents can adjust their push, adding air troops that she can't handle or distracting her with cheap units while their real threats slip past. Deploy her too late, and your tower takes unnecessary damage before she engages. The sweet spot is deploying her just as enemy troops are committing to their push trajectory when they close enough that you can see exactly what you defending against, but not so close that they've already reached your tower. This timing requires experience, pattern recognition, understanding typical push compositions, and anticipating what's coming before it's fully revealed. Reading your opponent's elixir and predicting their plays is crucial for defensive Valkyrie usage. If you know they have 4 elixir available, and you've seen they run Skeleton Army or Goblin Gang, holding your Valkyrie deployment until they commit that card makes sense. If you deploy her preemptively, and they simply don't play the swarm, your Valkyrie walks forward without getting defensive value, and you've essentially wasted 4 elixir. But if you wait for their swarm deployment and then immediately counter with Valkyrie, you've gained maximum defensive value. This mental chess game, tracking elixir, remembering what cards they've played, predicting what they're likely to play next, elevates defense from reactive button pushing to strategic decision making. The support troops you pair with Valkyrie on defense matter enormously. She handles ground swarms and medium threats, but needs help with tanks, air troops, and high damage threats. A musketeer behind the Valkyrie provides anti-air coverage and additional DPS. An ice spirit can freeze enemies for a moment, buying time for Valkyrie to get extra swings. A cannon or Tesla building can distract building targeting troops while Valkyrie eliminates supports. Understanding these defensive combinations, knowing which support troops complement Valkyrie's strengths and cover her weaknesses, is fundamental to building defensive competence. The elixir economy of defensive Valkyrie play requires careful attention. In Clash Royale, defending is generally more elixir efficient than attacking if done correctly. Your towers provide free damage, giving you an inherent advantage when defending. The Valkyrie helps maximize this advantage by providing positive or neutral elixir trades against common attacking combinations. 4 elixir that eliminates 6 or 7 elixir worth of enemy troops while surviving to counterpush represents excellent elixir value. 4 elixir that eliminates 3 elixir worth of troops, but your Valkyrie dies is negative value. A lost trade even though you defended successfully. Maximizing trades, extracting every bit of value from each Valkyrie deployment, turns good defense into economically crushing defense, but starves opponents of elixir and forces them into desperate plays. Tower health management involves recognizing when taking some tower damage is acceptable if it means getting better defensive positioning or elixir trades. Sometimes letting 2 Goblin Gang members reach your tower for a few hits while you position Valkyrie optimally for the larger incoming push behind them is correct. The tower damage hurts but is survivable, while optimal positioning against the main push might save hundreds more hit points. This calculation, weighing immediate damage against positioning for future threats, requires experience and calm decision-making under pressure. The double-lane defense scenario is one of Valkyrie's limitations. If opponents attack both lanes simultaneously, splitting their push to force you to defend in 2 places, one Valkyrie can only cover 1 lane. You need other defensive tools for the second lane, or you need to prioritize which lane the Valkyrie defends based on what threats are in each lane. This teaches the lesson that no single card answers everything. That comprehensive defense requires a defensive suite with multiple tools for different situations. The transition from defense to counterpush is where skilled Valkyrie players shine. She defends successfully, survives with varying amounts of health, and now sits on your side of the arena positioned to march toward enemy towers. The decision tree branches here. Do you immediately support her, dropping a hog rider or balloon behind her to create immediate counter pressure? Do you let her walk forward alone while you build elixir, waiting to see how your opponent responds before committing more resources? Do you ignore her counter push potential entirely, letting her walk forward as a distraction while you build a push in the opposite lane? Each choice creates different strategic scenarios with different risk-reward profiles. The psychological warfare of defensive Valkyrie play involves creating respect and fear in your opponent's mind. If you consistently punish their swarm plays with perfectly placed Valkyries, they'll hesitate to play swarms, which might make them play suboptimally, holding cards longer than they should, or playing more expensive counters than necessary. This psychological edge, earned through consistent excellent defense, can tilt matches in your favor by making opponents second-guess themselves. They're not just playing against your cards. They're playing against the memory of previous interactions. The expectation that you'll have the answer. The doubt that creeps in when strategies that should work keep failing. Defensive positioning around buildings adds another layer of complexity. If you have a cannon or tombstone placed to distract tank troops, your Valkyrie needs to be positioned to protect that building from support troops while the building handles the tank. If you have an Inferno tower working on a high health threat, Valkyrie needs to clear swarms that might distract or reset the Inferno. Buildings and troops working in concert create defensive synergies that are greater than the sum of their parts. And understanding how to position and time these combinations is advanced defensive craft. The patience required for excellent Valkyrie defense cannot be overstated. There's a temptation to deploy troops immediately when you see threats approaching, to do something rather than waiting passively while danger advances. But premature deployment often results in suboptimal positioning and wasted defensive value. Great Valkyrie defenders wait. They watch the push develop, identify all the components, determine the optimal placement, and then deploy with confidence at exactly the right moment. This patience under pressure, this calm in the face of advancing threats, separates masters from novices. Recovery from defensive mistakes when using Valkyrie involves recognizing when a placement was wrong and immediately adapting. If you dropped her in the wrong spot and enemy troops are slipping past, don't panic and overcommit elixir trying to salvage the situation. Sometimes taking modest tower damage while you're misplaced. Valkyrie deals with what she can reach is better than dumping additional elixir into a fundamentally compromised defensive setup. Learning to cut your losses, accept that this particular defense won't be perfect, and focus on defending better in the next cycle demonstrates mature strategic thinking. The practice required to master defensive Valkyrie play is substantial. Muscle memory for placement, pattern recognition for enemy push compositions, elixir tracking, timing windows, all of these skills develop through repetition. You need to defend hundreds, thousands of times, making mistakes and learning from them, refining your placement pixel by pixel, improving your timing by fractions of seconds. There's no shortcut to this mastery. It comes only through dedicated practice and conscious effort to improve. The satisfaction of perfect Valkyrie defense is one of Clash Royale's great pleasures. When you read your opponent perfectly, deploy at exactly the right moment in exactly the right position, and watch their carefully constructed push evaporate in 2 seconds of spinning axe. There's a deep sense of accomplishment. You've demonstrated skill, knowledge, and execution. You've turned their offensive investment into waste while positioning yourself for counterattack. These moments of perfect defense are why players love the Valkyrie, why she remains popular year after year despite meta shifts and new card releases. She delivers on the fantasy of being an unbreakable defensive wall, the guardian who stands firm while enemies break against her like waves against cliffs. Offensive capabilities, leading the charge, while the Valkyrie's defensive prowess often takes center stage. Her offensive potential should not be underestimated or overlooked. She may not be a primary win condition like Hog Rider or Balloon, but she plays crucial supporting roles in offensive strategies, creates counter-push opportunities, and in certain situations can deal meaningful tower damage herself. Understanding how to deploy the Valkyrie offensively, how to build pushes around her, and how to maximize her offensive value adds an essential dimension to mastering this versatile card. The foundation of offensive Valkyrie play is the counter-push transition. She defends successfully against an enemy push, survives with a portion of her health remaining, and now stands on your side of the arena, ready to march forward. This is the natural moment for offensive commitment. Your opponent has just spent elixir attacking, and likely has less available to defend. Your Valkyrie is already deployed, representing a sunk cost that you can leverage without additional elixir investment. The question becomes not whether to use her offensively, but how to support her for maximum effect. The simplest offensive use of Valkyrie is as a mini-tank for more fragile damage dealers, deploying a musketeer, wizard, or witch behind your advancing. Valkyrie creates a push where she absorbs damage from defensive troops and towers, while your ranged attacker deals damage from safety. The Valkyrie's health pool and area damage clear defending swarms that would normally eliminate your ranged troop quickly, allowing sustained tower damage. This push archetype, tanky troop in front with ranged damage behind, is fundamental to Clash Royale offense, and the Valkyrie serves this tanking role effectively at a moderate elixir cost. Pairing Valkyrie with Hog Rider creates a powerful ground-focused push. The Valkyrie leads, clearing swarms and medium defenders, while the Hog Rider's faster movement speed brings him forward to jump over the river and attack towers directly. The opponent must address both threats. If they commit troops to stop the Hog, your Valkyrie may break through to the tower. If they focus on the Valkyrie, the Hog gets free hits. This split threat dynamic forces difficult decisions and creates opportunities for damage, regardless of how they choose to defend. Combining Valkyrie with Balloon exploits her ground-clearing ability to protect an airwind condition. The Balloon floats toward the tower, while the Valkyrie marshes below, eliminating ground defenders that might distract the Balloon or deal damage to supporting troops. Air-targeting defenders focus the Balloon while ground troops focus the Valkyrie, splitting defensive resources and making it difficult to efficiently defend both simultaneously. This combination requires proper timing, ensuring the Balloon and Valkyrie arrive at the bridge and tower area at roughly the same moment to maximize the split threat pressure. Using Valkyrie as a lead tank for a beatdown push, though unconventional compared to traditional tanks like Giant or Golem, can work in specific situations. Her moderate cost means you can deploy her without committing massive elixir, building the push behind her with support troops and spells as you generate elixir while crossing the arena. This creates a rolling snowball effect where you start with a modest investment and gradually add pieces. And if your opponent doesn't respond quickly enough, the push grows overwhelming. The Valkyrie's area damage means defenders trying to swarm the push get cleared automatically, forcing opponents to use larger, more expensive defenders. The bridge spam application of Valkyrie involves deploying her directly at the bridge at the start of a push, creating immediate pressure that opponents must address quickly. At the bridge, she's only seconds away from tower range, forcing rapid defensive reactions. If the opponent hesitates or deploys inefficiently, she marshes straight to their tower, dealing swings of damage before they can properly respond. This aggressive bridge deployment works best when you know your opponent is low on elixir or has just used their best Valkyrie counters, creating windows where your offensive deployment is less likely to be efficiently answered. The split lane threat created by Valkyrie in one lane and a different threat in the opposite lane forces opponents to defend both sides simultaneously, stretching their elixir and attention. Valkyrie pushing one lane while Goblin Barrel or Miner attacks the opposite tower makes it difficult to defend everything efficiently. The opponent must choose priorities, and either choice allows you some damage or advantageous positioning. This split threat strategy is particularly effective late in matches when tower health is low and opponents can't afford to ignore any lane. Spell support for offensive Valkyrie amplifies her effectiveness dramatically. Zap or Log, clearing defensive swarms immediately as they redeployed, buys time for your Valkyrie to reach the tower. Free spell locking defenders in place while your Valkyrie continues spinning can result in devastating damage. Rage spell increasing her attack and movement speed turns her into a faster, deadlier threat that overwhelms defenders before they can fully mobilize. These spell investments add elixir to your push, increasing commitment and risk, but when successful, they often result in taking a tower or dealing crippling damage. The overtime pressure created by Valkyrie is significant in close matches. When elixir generation doubles during overtime and both players are desperately trying to take a tower, the Valkyrie's combination of tankiness and area damage makes her a dangerous threat. She can survive the intensified defensive firepower that overtime elixir allows while clearing the increased number of defenders that opponents can afford to deploy. Her reliability becomes even more valuable when one mistake, one failed defense, one successful offensive push can decide the match. Chip damage accumulation is an often overlooked aspect of offensive Valkyrie play. She might not take a tower in one push, but if she gets 3 swings on the tower this push, 4 swings next push, 2 swings after that, this damage accumulates. 500 damage here, 700 damage there, and suddenly the tower is low enough that a fireball or rocket can finish it. The Valkyrie contributes to this chip damage strategy reliably, almost inevitably getting some tower damage if she survives her defensive engagement and counter pushes. Predictive offensive Valkyrie deployment involves placing her before your opponent has deployed their defense, based on prediction of what they'll play. If you know they typically defend your pushes with skeleton army, dropping your Valkyrie preemptively means when they play their army, she's already in position to eliminate it instantly. This predictive play requires reading your opponent's patterns, understanding their deck and typical responses, and having the confidence to commit elixir based on prediction rather than reaction. When successful, it feels brilliant. When wrong, it can leave you overextended and vulnerable. The psychological pressure of Valkyrie advancing toward a tower creates anxiety for defenders. Even though she's not the fastest threat or the highest damage dealer, her presence demands response. Ignoring her is not an option. She will reach the tower, and she will deal meaningful damage. This guaranteed threat forces defensive commitment, and that commitment is what you're often actually seeking. If your opponent spends 5 elixir defending your 4 elixir Valkyrie, you're gaining an elixir advantage, even though the Valkyrie herself got no tower damage. These elixir trades and forced responses are the economic warfare underlying successful Clash Royale offense. The bait strategy involving Valkyrie works by forcing opponents to use their best Valkyrie counters on her, opening opportunities for other cards. If they use their air troops to kill your offensive Valkyrie, your balloon or baby dragon can push without facing those counters. If they commit heavy ground troops to stop her, your graveyard or swarms can exploit the temporary absence of their ground defenders. The Valkyrie serves as bait, drawing out specific responses that create vulnerabilities elsewhere in their defensive setup. Tower trading scenarios where both players are racing to take towers and crown the win based on having destroyed more tower health favor troops that deal reliable damage under pressure. The Valkyrie survivability means she tends to get at least some tower damage even in contested pushes where both players are committing significant resources. In races where every point of tower damage matters, her reliability is valuable. You can count on her dealing something, which makes calculating whether you can win the race more predictable. The late-game offensive utility of Valkyrie increases in some ways and decreases in others as matches progress. On one hand, tower health is lower, meaning her damage becomes more meaningful percentage-wise. On the other hand, players have seen each other's decks and know what counters exist. The element of surprise is gone. Success requires outplaying rather than out-strategizing. The Valkyrie's offensive value in late game depends heavily on execution, on perfect placement and timing, on leveraging small windows of opportunity when opponents make mistakes or run low on elixir. The three-crown rush strategy, attempting to destroy all three enemy towers instead of just winning by taking one or two, sometimes incorporates Valkyrie as part of the overwhelming force. When you've taken one tower and now have both side lanes to attack from, deploying Valkyries in both lanes creates dual threats that are difficult to defend simultaneously, especially if your opponent is already damaged and struggling. This aggressive three-crown attempt requires significant elixir advantage and favorable board state. But when conditions are right, the Valkyrie's area damage and tankiness make her an effective contributor to the final overwhelming push. The learning curve for offensive Valkyrie play is different from defensive play. Defense is often about reaction and precision, responding correctly to what your opponent does. Offense is about reads and predictions, about knowing when your opponent is vulnerable. When you have elixir advantage, when their counters are out of cycle, you're initiating action rather than responding to it. This shift in mindset, from reactive defender to proactive attacker, is something many players struggle with. Mastering both aspects, playing Valkyrie effectively on both defense and offense, marks the difference between a one-dimensional player and a complete, flexible strategist. The satisfaction of a successful Valkyrie offensive play is distinct from defensive satisfaction. Where defensive success brings relief and validation, offensive success brings triumph and aggression. Watching your Valkyrie, supported by your carefully constructed push, break through enemy defenses and demolish a tower provides visceral enjoyment. It's the payoff for correct strategic decisions, proper resource management, and precise execution. These offensive moments are why Clash Royale remains exciting even after thousands of matches. The possibilities for creative pushes, for unexpected combinations, for aggressive plays that catch opponents off guard, never fully exhausted. Deck archetypes and strategic synergies. The Valkyrie's versatility allows her to fit into multiple deck archetypes, each using her in slightly different ways to accomplish different strategic goals. Understanding these archetypes, the role Valkyrie plays within them, and the synergies that make each deck functional provides insight into both her flexibility as a card and the broader strategic landscape of Clash Royale. Great players don't just know individual cards. They understand how those cards fit into coherent strategic systems, how they complement, and enable each other to create gameplay that is greater than the sum of individual parts. Control decks represent perhaps the Valkyrie's most natural home. Control strategies focus on efficient defense, establishing elixir advantage through positive trades, and winning through accumulated small advantages rather than single devastating pushes. The Valkyrie excels in this paradigm. She defends efficiently against swarms and medium threats, survives engagements healthy enough to counter-push, and doesn't require expensive support troops to function. A typical control deck featuring Valkyrie might include defensive buildings like Cannon or Tesla, ranged troops like Musketeer or Mega Minion, spells for various situations, and a modest win condition like Hog Rider or Meyer. The Valkyrie is the defensive anchor, the card that reliably handles ground threats while other defensive tools address air units and tanks. Beatdown decks built around heavy tanks like Golem, Giant, or Lava Hound sometimes include Valkyrie as a support troop who protects the expensive tank from swarm defenders. In these compositions, The tank leads the push, absorbing tower damage and defensive troop attacks, while the Valkyrie walks behind, clearing everything that tries to stop the advance. Wizards, witches, or other area damage dealers fulfill similar roles, but the Valkyrie's combination of area damage and survivability makes her particularly effective. She can reach the tower with the tank and continue dealing damage while the tank is being eliminated, extending the duration of your push and maximizing the damage output from your elixir investment. Bridge spam decks that apply constant pressure at the bridge using medium-cost troops in quick succession sometimes include Valkyrie as one of the spam options. Cards like Battle Ram, Bandit, Royal Ghost, and Valkyrie can be cycled rapidly, forcing opponents to defend constantly without time to build counter-pushes. The Valkyrie, in this context, serves dual purposes. She's a spam threat that opponents must address, and she provides defensive capability against enemy bridge spam if they try to match your aggression. This flexibility, being able to play aggressively or defensively, depending on the game state, is valuable in the chaotic, pressure-filled nature of bridge spam strategies. Cycle decks that use cheap cards to rapidly rotate through their deck and repeatedly deploy their win condition sometimes include Valkyrie, despite her being more expensive than ideal for pure cycle. The inclusion is defensive necessity. Fast cycle decks using Hog Rider, Mire, or Goblin Barrel as win conditions need something that handles swarms reliably. And the Valkyrie provides this even though she slows the overall cycle time slightly. She represents a concession to reality, the acknowledgement that you can't cycle fast enough to win if you're retaking massive tower damage from enemy swarms. The Valkyrie protects the cycle strategy, allowing it to function without being overwhelmed defensively. Graveyard decks, built around the graveyard spell that spawns skeletons around enemy towers, often include Valkyrie for two reasons. First, she tanks damage while the graveyard skeletons chip the tower, forcing opponents to defend both the skeletons and the Valkyrie simultaneously. Second, opponents often defend graveyard with ground troops that gather around their tower to kill skeletons, creating perfect opportunities for follow-up poison or fireball spells. The Valkyrie helps set up these opportunities and provides the defensive stability that graveyard decks need, since the spell itself offers no defensive value. Minor control decks combine the chip damage of repeated minor deployments with strong defensive core and spells. Valkyrie fits naturally here, providing the defensive reliability, while Minor applies constant pressure and forces defensive commitments. The deck plays patiently, defending efficiently, sending miners repeatedly for chip damage, and occasionally building larger pushes when opponent makes mistakes or runs low on elixir. The Valkyrie's role is maintaining defensive control, ensuring that opponents can't punish your relatively modest offensive investments with overwhelming counter-pushes. Siege decks, using X-Bow or Mortar to attack from range, have occasionally included Valkyrie, though she's not as common in these archetypes. Her role would be defending the siege building from ground troops that try to destroy it, spinning around the X-Bow or Mortar and eliminating swarms that approach. However, buildings like Tesla often serve this defensive role better in siege decks, and the Valkyrie, as 4 elixir cost, can be awkward in strategies that need to save elixir for the expensive siege building and its spell support. 3 Musketeers decks, built around the 9 elixir 3 Musketeers card that splits into 1 and 2 Musketeers in different lanes, sometimes use Valkyrie to protect the Musketeer pushes from swarms. She tanks damage for the high DPS but fragile Musketeers, her area damage clearing defenders that would normally overwhelm ranged troops. These decks are expensive and require careful elixir management, and the Valkyrie provides reliable defensive value that helps stabilize until you can afford to deploy your expensive split push. Evolved Valkyrie decks represent a newer archetype built specifically around maximizing the value of the evolution. These decks include cards that synergize with the pulling mechanic, like Bomber or Wizard, who deal area damage to the clustered enemies, or executioner who throws his axe through multiple targets. The strategy revolves around creating situations where the evolved Valkyrie's whirlwind ability generates massive value, pulling spread enemy forces into kill zones where your area damage cards can eliminate everything efficiently. The deck building constraint of only allowing one. Evolution means these decks are built intentionally around making the evolved Valkyrie the star, not just an included card. Clan War decks face unique constraints, often requiring players to use level-capped cards or cards from limited selections. The Valkyrie's usefulness in these formats comes from her versatility and forgiving nature. Even underlevel, she provides valuable area damage and defensive capability. Even when you can't build your ideal deck, including Valkyrie gives you reliable functionality against common threats. Her presence in Clan War formats is higher than might be expected based purely on competitive power level, because she's accessible, reliable, and functional in suboptimal situations. Tournament decks used by professional players in high-stakes competition often include Valkyrie when the meta favors ground-heavy strategies. Professional play emphasizes consistency and minimizing mistakes over flashy high-risk plays. The Valkyrie's reliability appeals to this mindset. You know what she does. You can count on her doing it, and she doesn't create situations where a small execution error costs you the match. This consistency is valuable when tournament prizes and professional pride are on the line. Synergy with specific cards creates sub-strategies within these broader archetypes. Valkyrie plus Mega Minion provides complete anti-swarm coverage, ground and air, in just 2 card slots. Valkyrie plus Tornado creates pulling combos where Tornado drags enemies into Valkyrie's damage radius, multiplying her effectiveness. Valkyrie plus Ice Golem combines 2 tanky troops with area damage and slowing effects, creating defensive walls that are extremely difficult to break through. Understanding these specific card synergies, how they enable each other and create emergent gameplay greater than either card alone, is essential for sophisticated deck building. Counter synergies, cards that don't work well together, are equally important to recognize. Valkyrie plus other expensive ground troops can create deck imbalance where you lack cheap cycle options or air defense. Multiple area damage troops might be redundant, providing more swarm clear than necessary while lacking other defensive tools. Building decks requires balancing multiple considerations, ensuring you have answers to various threats, maintaining reasonable average elixir cost, and including cards that work well together. The Valkyrie fits many decks well, but not all, and understanding when she is the right choice versus when different cards serve your strategy better is crucial for successful deck building. The meta-dependence of optimal Valkyrie usage means that her place in deck archetype shifts over time. When swarm strategies dominate the competitive scene, Valkyrie becomes nearly essential in most decks. When air-heavy metas develop, her usage drops. Skilled players and deck builders track meta trends, adjusting their decks to counter popular strategies. And the Valkyrie's presence or absence in their lists reflects these meta calculations. She's never completely absent, but her ubiquity varies with the strategic climate. Adaptation of archetypes to individual playstyle means that no 2 players' Valkyrie decks play identically, even when using similar cards. Some players use her aggressively, constantly looking for counter-push opportunities and offensive commitments. Other players use her purely defensively, never supporting her offensive pushes and treating her solely as a defensive tool. These playstyle differences within the same archetype create diversity in how Valkyrie strategies actually execute in matches, making the game more dynamic and less formulaic than if everyone played every deck the same way. The evolution of archetypes over Clash Royale's history shows the Valkyrie adapting to new strategic environments repeatedly. Early meta archetypes look different from modern ones, using cards and strategies that no longer exist or have been fundamentally changed by balance updates. Through all these shifts, the Valkyrie has found homes, adjusted her role, and remained relevant. This adaptability across strategic epochs testifies to the strength of her core design, area damage, and survivability in moderate cost package that fits multiple needs. Counters, vulnerabilities, and playing against Valkyrie. Understanding how to defeat the Valkyrie is as important as understanding how to use her effectively. For players facing opponents who skillfully deploy Valkyrie, knowing her vulnerabilities, understanding optimal counter strategies, and mastering the specific techniques that shut down her effectiveness separates competitive players from casual ones. Every card has weaknesses, and the Valkyrie, despite her defensive prowess and versatility, possesses exploitable limitations that prepared opponents can leverage for advantage. Air troops represent the most straightforward and reliable Valkyrie counter. She cannot hit flying units under any circumstances. Minions, Mega Minion, Baby Dragon, Inferno Dragon, Balloon, Lava Hound, all of these cards attack the Valkyrie with complete impunity. She can only tank their damage helplessly until she dies. This fundamental vulnerability means that any deck running Valkyrie must include separate answers to air threats. And any deck facing Valkyrie should seriously consider including air troops, specifically to exploit this weakness. The elixir trade here favors the air troops. A 3 elixir minions card eliminates a 4 elixir Valkyrie efficiently, generating positive value. Ranged ground troops with proper positioning can also counter Valkyrie effectively without taking damage themselves. Musketeer, Magic Archer, Dark Goblin, Princess. These units can attack the Valkyrie from outside her melee range. The key is maintain distance and, if necessary, using other troops or buildings to keep her at bay while your ranged attacker chips her health. This counter strategy requires more finesse than simply dropping air troops, as misplacement can allow the Valkyrie to close distance and eliminate your ranged unit, but when executed correctly, it's highly elixir efficient. Building cards provide excellent Valkyrie counters by distracting her while dealing damage. Tesla, Inferno Tower, Cannon, Bomb Tower. These defensive structures draw her aggro, causing her to attack the building instead of advancing toward your tower or engaging your troops. While she attacks the building, it damages her, and your towers contribute additional damage, eliminating her before she destroys the building. This creates a positive elixir trade in most cases. 4 elixir spent to counter 4 elixir, but your building survives with remaining health to defend against follow-up attacks. High-damage single-target troops can eliminate Valkyrie quickly if they can engage her without interference. Mini P.E.K.K.A., Prince, especially with Charge, Lumberjack, and other heavy hitters deal damage faster than the Valkyrie's health pool can absorb. The challenge is isolating the Valkyrie from her supporting troops. If she's advancing alone, dropping a mini P.E.K.K.A. in front of her results in a quick elimination. If she's supported by other troops that can distract or damage your mini P.E.K.K.A., the interaction becomes more complicated. Successfully countering Valkyrie with heavy hitters requires reading the situation, understanding what troops are supporting her, and timing your deployment to maximize your heavy hitters' damage output. Swarming the Valkyrie with successive waves of cheap troops can overwhelm her despite her area damage. One skeleton army dies instantly to her spin. But if you follow that army immediately with goblins, and then with bats, constantly reapplying pressure, the accumulated damage from these successive waves can eliminate her before she clears them all. This counter strategy is elixir intensive, spending 6 or 7 elixir to counter her 4, but it is sometimes necessary if you lack better counter options, or if stopping her is critical to preventing tower damage from her supporting troops. Kiting the Valkyrie, using troops to pull her away from her intended target, can minimize her effectiveness without necessarily killing her. Playing a troop near the bridge that draws her attention, then playing another troop on the opposite side can pull her back and forth, wasting her time and health while she accomplishes nothing meaningful. This technique requires more elixir than direct counters, but can be valuable when you need to prevent her from reaching your tower or when you want to waste clock time while building an elixir advantage. Spell counters exist, but are generally inefficient. Rocket can kill an equal level Valkyrie, but spending 6 elixir to eliminate 4 elixir is terrible value unless the rocket also hits other troops or a tower. Lightning spell can kill her while hitting 2 other targets, creating potentially positive value if those other targets are valuable. Fireball doesn't kill her but severely weakens her, making follow-up damage from towers or troops finish her quickly. Using spells on Valkyrie is typically reserved for emergency situations, where you lack better counters or where the spell hits multiple valuable targets simultaneously. Prediction placements, deploying counter troops before the opponent places Valkyrie, based on anticipating where and when they'll deploy her, can create advantageous defensive setups. If you know they typically counter your pushes with Valkyrie, pre-placing air troops or buildings in positions that will optimally counter her creates situations where your defense is already established when she appears. This predictive play requires reading your opponent's patterns, understanding their deck, and having the confidence to commit elixir based on prediction. When correct, it creates overwhelming defensive advantage. When wrong, you've misallocated resources and left yourself vulnerable. Understanding level interactions is crucial when countering Valkyrie. An over-leveled Valkyrie survives interactions that should kill her at equal levels, tanks additional tower shots, and kills defenders in fewer hits. If your opponent's Valkyrie is 2 levels higher than your counters, standard counter strategies may fail. You might need to commit more elixir, use multiple counter troops instead of one, or accept that efficiently countering her isn't possible and focus on minimizing damage rather than preventing it entirely. This reality of level disadvantage is frustrating, but manageable with proper adjustment of expectations and strategy. The timing of counter deployments matters enormously. Deploy too early, and the Valkyrie can adjust her path, or the opponent can support her with additional troops that address your counter. Deploy too late, and she gets tower damage before your counter engages. The optimal timing is just as she commits to her attack trajectory. When she's close enough, the path adjustments are difficult, but not so close, the tower damage is inevitable. This timing window is narrow, requiring quick decision-making and precise execution under pressure. Forcing negative elixir trades, making the opponent spend more on Valkyrie pushes than they get in damage value, is a legitimate counter strategy, even when you can't prevent all damage. If they spend 4 elixir on Valkyrie, plus 4 elixir supporting her, and you spend 7 elixir defending but only take 300 tower damage, you've won the economic exchange. They invested 8 elixir for minimal return. Even though you spend 7 elixir defending, that 7 elixir worth of troops survives to counter-push while they're down 8 elixir. This economic warfare, tracking investments and returns, is fundamental to high-level Clash Royale play. Psychological pressure can be applied by demonstrating consistently effective Valkyrie counters. If you shut down their Valkyrie plays reliably for several cycles, they may hesitate to use her, hold her longer than optimal, or deploy her in suboptimal situations out of desperation. This psychological edge compounds your strategic advantage. They're not just facing your cards. They're facing the expectation of failure, the memory of previous failed Valkyrie deployments, the doubt about whether their strategies will work at all. Creating this mental burden through consistent successful countering tilts matches in your favor beyond pure card interactions. Adapting counters based on game state and elixir counts is advanced play. If you're ahead in elixir, you can afford more expensive counters that completely shut down the Valkyrie. If you're behind in elixir, you might need to use cheaper, less complete counters and accept some tower damage while you rebuild elixir advantage. If the match is close and every point of tower damage matters, you commit whatever elixir is necessary to minimize damage. If you are significantly ahead and can afford to tank some hits, you might counter less aggressively, saving elixir for offensive opportunities. Understanding what deck archetype your opponent is using helps predict how they'll use their Valkyrie and prepares you to counter appropriately. If they're running beatdown, expect the Valkyrie as support behind tanks. If they're playing control, expect her as a defensive tool that will counter-push. If they're bridge spamming, expect her as part of the spam rotation. Each usage pattern requires slightly different counter strategies, and recognizing deck archetypes early in matches allows you to prepare mentally for how you'll need to counter their Valkyrie. Baiting out the Valkyrie, forcing the opponent to use her defensively before you commit your main push, creates windows of opportunity. If you send a small probe attack that they counter with Valkyrie, you know she's out of cycle for several card rotations. During that window, your swarm cards are safer to deploy aggressively. This baiting strategy requires thinking several moves ahead, planning your attack sequence, not just around what you want to do, but around forcing your opponent to use their counters at times that benefit you. Trading towers, accepting damage on one of your towers while you push the opposite lane for more damage on their tower, sometimes involves deliberately accepting Valkyrie damage. If countering her would require elixir that you need for your offensive push, and if your calculation suggests you'll get more damage than you take, letting her hit your tower while you overwhelm their defenses in the other lane can be correct. This calculation requires quick math, estimating damage rates, and having the composure to execute the strategy even as your tower takes hits that feel painful to watch. Learning from losses where opponent's Valkyrie was problematic creates improvement opportunities. Reviewing replays, analyzing what went wrong, identifying better counter strategies, or timing adjustments turns losses into lessons. Maybe you needed different cards in your deck to address Valkyrie more effectively. Maybe your counter deployment timing was consistently off. Maybe you were trying to counter her in situations where accepting damage and focusing on offense would have been better. Each loss provides data for improvement if you're willing to analyze critically and adjust. The evolution system adds complexity to countering Valkyrie. When facing Evolved Valkyrie with her whirlwind ability, counters that involve placing multiple ground troops can backfire as she pulls them all together for efficient elimination. Air troops become even more valuable against the evolution since they're immune to the pull. Buildings remain effective. High-damage single-target troops work if placed carefully. The key difference is avoiding clustering ground defenders where the whirlwind can pull them into a death zone. Spreading defensive deployments, using air troops, maintaining distance. These adjusted strategies address the evolution's enhanced capabilities. Spell usage against Valkyrie pushes, even when spells don't directly damage her significantly, can provide value by eliminating supporting troops or knocking back advances. Zap resetting charging troops, log pushing background swarms, arrows eliminating air supports. These spells don't counter the Valkyrie herself, but they dismantle the support structure that makes her pushes dangerous. Without supporting troops, a lone Valkyrie is much easier to handle with basic defensive tools. Accepting that some matches are counter matchups where your deck struggles against theirs, including their Valkyrie, is part of competitive maturity. Not every match is winnable, and forcing strategies that aren't working out of desperation often leads to worse outcomes than playing defensively, minimizing damage, and hoping for opponent mistakes or favorable situations. Recognizing when you in a bad matchup and adjusting expectations while still playing your best demonstrates strategic wisdom. The community knowledge about Valkyrie counters has evolved significantly over the game's history. In early days, many players struggled against her, not understanding that air troops were reliable answers or that buildings provided efficient defense. As collective knowledge grew through guides, videos, and shared experiences, the average player's ability to counter Valkyrie improved. This rising skill floor means that strategies relying heavily on opponents failing to counter Valkyrie effectively work less reliably at higher trophy levels. What crushes beginners gets efficiently shut down by experienced players who've internalized counter strategies through hundreds of encounters. The satisfaction of perfectly countering an opponent's Valkyrie, particularly when they've built an expensive push around her, rivals any successful offensive play. When you read their push correctly, deploy your counter at the perfect moment and position, and watch their 8 or 9 elixir investment evaporate while your counter troops survive healthy to mount a devastating counter push, there's a deep sense of mastery and control. You've demonstrated superior knowledge, execution, and game understanding. These moments of defensive perfection are what keeps competitive Clash Royale engaging even after thousands of matches. The Warrior's legacy, cultural impact, and community beyond statistics, strategy, and competitive play. The Valkyrie has achieved something more intangible, but equally important in Clash Royale's 8-plus-year history. She has become a cultural icon within the game's community. She appears in fan art, memes, and player stories. She represents certain playstyles and attitudes. She connects to players emotionally in ways that transcend her mechanical function as a collection of programmed behaviors and damage numbers. Understanding this cultural dimension of the Valkyrie helps explain why she remains beloved long after players have mastered her mechanics and moved on to exploring other cards. The fan art community has produced thousands of Valkyrie pieces over the years, from quick sketches to elaborate digital paintings. Artists are drawn to her distinctive design, that shock of orange hair, the massive axe, the dynamic spinning pose. She lends herself to action-oriented art, capturing moments of combat with energy and motion. But fan artists have also explored other aspects of her character, imagining her in peaceful moments, in humorous situations, in crossover scenarios with other games and franchises. This creative output reflects genuine affection for the character beyond her gameplay utility. Cosplayers at gaming conventions have recreated the Valkyrie's appearance, crafting the armor, the massive double-bladed axe, styling orange wigs to match her distinctive hair. These physical recreations demonstrate dedication and craftsmanship, transforming a digital character into tangible reality. The effort required for quality Valkyrie cosplay is substantial, but the cosplayers undertake it because the character resonates with them, because they want to embody that warrior spirit, to become the spinning defender for a day. The meme culture around Valkyrie often focuses on her counter relationship with swarms. Images and videos showing Valkyries obliterating skeleton armies with satisfying completeness have become recurring jokes within the community. The phrase Valkyrie value has entered the community lexicon, referring to those perfect defensive plays where she eliminates massive amounts of enemy elixir investment with a single deployment. These memes and linguistic shortcuts create shared references that bind the community together, inside jokes that mark membership in the Clash Royale cultural sphere. Player stories and memorable moments frequently feature the Valkyrie. Players remember the time they perfectly timed a Valkyrie deployment to save a match. They recall the tournament game where their opponent's Valkyrie play caught them completely off guard. They share replays of incredible Valkyrie performances, either by themselves or opponents, showcasing particularly skillful or fortunate plays. These stories, shared in clan chats, on social media, and content creator videos, form the oral tradition of Clash Royale, the collective memory that gives the game history and meaning beyond individual matches. The Valkyrie's association with certain playstyles has created stereotypes within the community, both positive and negative. Players who favor control decks and patient, defensive play are sometimes described as Valkyrie players, suggesting reliability, steadiness, and preference for low-risk strategies. This isn't necessarily an insult or compliment, just recognition of the playstyle correlation. The Valkyrie has become shorthand for a certain approach to the game, emblematic of players who prioritize consistent performance over flashy high-risk plays. Content creators have built substantial content libraries around the Valkyrie. YouTube features hundreds of videos titled things like Valkyrie Domination, Perfect Valkyrie Placement Guide, Valkyrie in Every Deck, and countless variations. These videos rack up millions of cumulative views, demonstrating sustained community interest in content about this card specifically. Creators return to Valkyrie content regularly because it performs well, because audiences want to learn about her, improve their usage, see her in action. This content ecosystem around specific cards helps educate new players and keeps veteran players engaged with fresh perspectives on familiar tools. The Valkyrie's appearance in Supercell's official marketing materials, trailers, and promotional content reflects her status as a franchise icon. She features prominently in update announcements, season promotional images, and celebration events. Supercell recognizes her popularity and leverages it to maintain player engagement. When new features or events launch, seeing the Valkyrie included in promotional materials creates a sense of continuity and tradition, reassuring players that their favorite cards remain relevant and celebrated. The debate about whether Valkyrie is skilled or no-skill card surfaces periodically in community discussions. Some players argue that her straightforward mechanics and reliable performance make her a low-skill card that anyone can use effectively without much practice. Others counter that optimal Valkyrie placement and timing require substantial skill and experience. The difference between mediocre and excellent Valkyrie players is vast. This debate, while sometimes contentious, indicates that players care deeply about the perceived skill requirements of their favorite cards, that they want their successes with those cards to be recognized as demonstrations of mastery rather than mere luck or card power. The Valkyrie's relationship with the game's F2P, free-to-play versus P2P, pay-to-play dynamics, is relatively favorable. As a rare card, she's significantly easier for free players to upgrade compared to epic or legendary cards. A dedicated free player can realistically max their Valkyrie within a reasonable time frame, whereas maxing multiple legendary cards without spending money requires years. This accessibility has made her popular among the free-to-play community, seen as a powerful card that doesn't require financial investment to be competitive. The perception of fairness, that skilled play with accessible cards can compete with expensive decks, keeps players engaged even if they never spend money. The evolution of Valkyrie's meta presence over time has created nostalgia among veteran players. Those who played during her various dominant periods remember specific eras of the game associated with her prominence. Remember when Valkyrie was in every deck? Becomes a conversation starter, a way for veteran players to connect over shared history. These nostalgia conversations bind longtime community members together, creating a sense of having lived through the game's history rather than just playing matches in an eternal present. The comparison between Valkyrie and other area-damaged troops sparks endless debate. Is she better than Bomber? Than Dark Prince? Than Executioner? These discussions have no definitive answer because each card fills slightly different niches, but the debates themselves are valuable community engagement. Players articulate their preferences, defend their choices, learn from others' perspectives. The Valkyrie's place in these discussions, neither universally considered the absolute best nor dismissed as inferior, reflects her balanced design. She's good enough to have passionate defenders, but not so dominant that her superiority is unquestionable. The Valkyrie's representation in tier lists and meta reports provides ongoing storylines for the community to follow. When balance changes or new card releases shift the meta and Valkyrie's tier position rises or falls, it creates discussion and reaction. Players debate whether the tier list is accurate, whether the meta will evolve to make Valkyrie more or less viable, whether alternative cards should be considered instead. These discussions keep the community actively engaged with the game's strategic landscape, thinking critically about card evaluation and deck construction. The generational aspect of Clash Royale players, with new players constantly joining while veterans move on or continue playing, means that the Valkyrie is perpetually someone's favorite card for the first time. The excitement of a new player discovering how effectively she handles swarms, the satisfaction of learning optimal placement, the pride in mastering her usage, these experiences repeat across millions of players over the years. The Valkyrie facilitates countless individual journeys from beginner to skilled player, serving as a teaching tool that demonstrates fundamental Clash Royale principles. The connection between Valkyrie and Norse mythology, while not deeply developed within Clash Royale itself, creates additional layers of meaning for players familiar with the mythological roots. Knowing that this spinning warrior references legendary figures from ancient stories adds weight and gravitas to her character. She's not just a gameplay mechanic. She's connected to human cultural heritage spanning millennia. This connection to mythology elevates her from mere game piece to something more significant, a modern retelling of ancient archetypes adapted for digital battlefields. The communal experiences of major Valkyrie moments, like when her evolution was revealed or when significant balance changes were announced, create shared history. Players remember where they were, what they thought, how they reacted when they learned about these developments. These shared experiences, mediated through social media, content creator reactions, and clan discussions, bind the community together. Everyone who plays Clash Royale has a Valkyrie story, an opinion about her, memories of matches where she was crucial. This universal experience creates common ground for discussion and connection. The future of Valkyrie in Clash Royale as continuing evolution remains a topic of speculation and hope within the community. Players wonder what new mechanics might be introduced that could affect her viability. They anticipate potential new evolutions or star-level additions. They hope for balanced updates that keep her relevant without making her oppressive. This forward-looking engagement, thinking about where the Valkyrie and the game are heading rather than just reflecting on where they've been, demonstrates that she remains a living part of the game's culture rather than a relic of earlier eras. The emotional attachment players develop to their favorite cards, including the Valkyrie, might seem strange to outsiders. She's just code, just pixels, just numbers representing health and damage. But the players who've used her hundreds or thousands of times, who've won crucial matches because of perfect Valkyrie plays, who've built their strategies around her reliability, she becomes more than that. She becomes a companion, a trusted tool, a representation of their playstyle and values. This emotional dimension of gaming, the attachment to virtual elements that facilitate meaningful experiences, is real and valid even if the game elements themselves are artificial. Advanced techniques and mastery, moving beyond basic understanding of the Valkyrie into the realm of true mastery, requires learning advanced techniques, subtle optimizations, and situational adjustments that separate good players from great ones. These refinements often involve tiny details, placement adjustments measured in individual tiles, timing adjustments measured in fractions of seconds, contextual decisions that depend on tracking multiple variables simultaneously. Mastery isn't a destination, but a continuous process of refinement and adaptation. Tile-perfect placement represents one of the most important advanced Valkyrie skills. The Clash Royale arena operates on a tile grid, and the exact tile where you place the Valkyrie can determine whether she engages optimally or suboptimally. One tile difference can mean the difference between hitting 6 enemy troops simultaneously versus hitting 3. Against approaching swarms, placing her one tile forward versus one tile back changes when she starts swinging. How much damage your tower takes before she engages. Whether she is positioned to continue forward after clearing the swarm, or whether she is awkwardly positioned for follow-up defense. Developing the precision to place her on exactly the optimal tile in the heat of battle requires extensive practice and internalization of the arena geography. Pre-placement for predictive defense takes tile-perfect placement to another level. This involves deploying the Valkyrie before opponents commit their troops, based on anticipating where and when they'll attack. If you correctly predict a bridge spam push, placing your Valkyrie at the bridge before their troops arrive creates perfect defensive positioning. If you mispredict, you've deployed 4 elixir for no immediate value. The risk-reward calculation here is complex, but in situations where you have high confidence in your prediction based on elixir counts, deck knowledge, and opponent patterns, pre-placement can create overwhelming defensive advantages. Elixir counting and card rotation tracking are crucial skills that elevate Valkyrie play from reactive to strategic. By tracking what cards your opponent has played and roughly calculating when those cards will return to their hand rotation, you can anticipate when they can and can't deploy specific threats. If you know their skeleton army is in rotation and they have enough elixir to play it, holding your Valkyrie deployment until they commit that card extracts maximum defensive value. If you know their army is out of rotation because they just used it, you can deploy your Valkyrie more aggressively without worrying about her being distracted by a late arriving swarm. Frame-perfect timing for spell and troop combinations involves deploying the Valkyrie and supporting cards in specific sequences with precise timing to maximize synergy. For example, deploying Valkyrie followed immediately by Tornado spell to pull scattered enemies into her damage radius. Requires timing the tornado so it pulls enemies just as her axe is swinging, eliminating them before they can spread back out. These precise combinations create burst efficiency that exceeds what either card could accomplish independently. Tower health management considerations affect optimal Valkyrie placement throughout a match. Early game, when towers are full health, you can accept more tower damage in exchange for better positioning for subsequent defenses. Late game, when towers are low, every point of damage matters and optimal. Valkyrie placement must minimize tower hits, even if it means less efficient positioning for the broader engagement. Adjusting placement strategies dynamically based on current tower health demonstrates sophisticated situation awareness. Overtime adaptation requires shifting your Valkyrie usage to account for doubled elixir generation. Strategies that were too expensive in single elixir become viable in overtime. You can support Valkyrie pushes more heavily, use her more aggressively, cycle her back faster if the first deployment doesn't achieve desired results. But opponents also have more elixir for defense, so the calculus of what constitutes good value changes. Mastering overtime Valkyrie play requires recalibrating your intuitions about elixir investment and return. Matchup-specific strategies for Valkyrie usage account for how different opponent deck types require different approaches. Against spell-bait decks, save your Valkyrie for the moments when they've successfully baited your spells and are committed to their swarm punish. Against beatdown, deploy her slightly later in tank pushes so she engages support troops as they cross the bridge rather than too early when there is nothing for her to hit. Against cycle, use her defensively and never commit her offensively, since fast cycle opponents will punish expensive offensive investments. These matchup adjustments show deep understanding of strategic rock-paper-scissors relationships between deck archetypes. Reading opponent patterns and exploiting them with Valkyrie requires observing how they respond to various situations and adjusting your Valkyrie usage to exploit their tendencies. If they always use air troops to counter your Valkyrie, start baiting those air troops with your Valkyrie defensively, then pushing with your actual air-based win condition when their counters are out of cycle. If they tend to panic and overcommit elixir when your Valkyrie reaches their tower, create situations where she reaches the tower as bait, while you prepare devastating counterattacks in the opposite lane. Exploiting patterns requires first recognizing them, then having the discipline to adjust your play to take advantage. Psychological manipulation through Valkyrie usage involves creating expectations and then violating them. If you establish a pattern of always deploying Valkyrie defensively at the bridge, opponents begin expecting that placement. Then, Unexpectedly placing her more aggressively or in a different position catches them off guard. Similarly, if you've used Valkyrie consistently throughout a match, they'll expect her and play around that expectation. Deliberately not playing her for several cycles can cause them to become more aggressive with swarms, setting up opportunities where her eventual deployment gets massive value because they'd stop respecting her presence. Energy management over the course of long matches or tournament runs involves pacing your concentration and decision-making quality. You can't maintain peak focus for every second of a 3-minute match, let alone for multiple matches in a tournament. Learning when to expend maximum mental energy on crucial decisions versus when to fall back on trained instincts and habits preserves cognitive resources. Your 100th Valkyrie deployment of the day doesn't need the same conscious analysis as a critical tournament match deployment. Developing appropriate trust in your trained skills prevents mental fatigue while maintaining performance. Replay analysis for Valkyrie improvement involves critically reviewing your matches, identifying suboptimal placements or timing, and consciously practicing better alternatives. Recording matches, watching them afterward, noting moments where different Valkyrie usage would have produced better outcomes, and deliberately practicing those improved techniques creates a feedback loop that accelerates skill development. This deliberate practice, focused specifically on improvement rather than just playing for enjoyment, separates players who stagnate from players who continue developing skill. Learning from professional players and top ladder competitors by watching their gameplay, analyzing their Valkyrie usage, and attempting to incorporate their techniques into your own play provides mentorship at scale. When a professional player makes a brilliant Valkyrie play in a tournament, studying exactly what they did, understanding why it worked, and attempting to replicate that play in your own matches transfers their expertise to your game. The readily available content from top players creates unprecedented learning opportunities for anyone willing to study seriously. Muscle memory development through repetition embeds optimal Valkyrie placements and timings into unconscious habit. After placing her thousands of times in similar situations, your hands move to the correct position before your conscious mind fully processes why. This automaticity frees mental resources for higher-level strategic thinking. You're not thinking about the mechanics of Valkyrie placement. You're thinking about the broader match strategy, and your hands are handling the execution details automatically based on trained patterns. Developing this muscle memory requires substantial time investment that pays dividends in improved performance under pressure. Adaptability when strategies aren't working prevents stubborn adherence to failing approaches. If your standard Valkyrie usage isn't effective against this particular opponent, maybe because they have hard counters you haven't encountered often, or because their playstyle creates unusual situations, being willing to adjust your approach even mid-match demonstrates strategic flexibility. Maybe you need to stop counter-pushing with her and use her purely defensively. Maybe you need to pair her with different supporting troops than usual. Maybe you need to use her as bait rather than as a primary tool. Recognizing when adaptation is necessary and having the flexibility to execute different strategies prevents losses that come from inflexible adherence to predetermined plans. The integration of Valkyrie mastery into broader Clash Royale expertise shows how card-specific skills contribute to overall game skill. You can't become truly excellent at Clash Royale by mastering only one card. But mastering one card deeply teaches principles that transfer to understanding other cards. The precision, timing, prediction, and adaptation skills you develop through Valkyrie mastery apply to every other card and every strategic situation. The Valkyrie becomes a vehicle for learning broader lessons about competitive gaming, about making decisions under pressure, about continuous improvement, about mental discipline. The satisfaction of mastery itself provides intrinsic motivation that transcends winning or losing individual matches. When you make a perfect Valkyrie play, when you place her with tile-perfect precision at exactly the right moment and achieve exactly The result you intended, there's deep satisfaction in that execution, regardless of whether you ultimately win the match. This pursuit of excellence, of doing things as well as they can be done, provides meaning and engagement that lasts long after the novelty of initial learning wears off. Mastery becomes its own reward, and the Valkyrie provides a vehicle for pursuing that mastery. The Eternal Guardian, why Valkyrie endures as we near the end of this exploration of the Valkyrie. It is worth contemplating why she has remained relevant and beloved across 8 Clash Royale's existence. In a game that has added over 100 cards since launch, that has introduced countless new mechanics and systems, that has undergone dramatic meta shifts and strategic revolutions, the Valkyrie has persisted. She has never been completely dominant, never been absolutely essential, yet she has never faded into obscurity. Understanding the reasons for her endurance provides insight into successful game design and the qualities that create lasting appeal. The simplicity of her core mechanic is fundamental to her endurance. She spins and deals area damage. This concept is immediately understandable, even to complete beginners. You don't need to read detailed explanations or watch tutorial videos to grasp what the Valkyrie does. You see her spin once and you understand. This accessibility ensures she remains relevant for new players constantly joining the game, while the nuances of optimal usage provide depth for veterans to continue mastering. The combination of accessible surface mechanics and deep optimization potential creates lasting appeal across skill levels. The reliability of her performance addresses a fundamental human desire for consistency and predictability in an otherwise chaotic environment. Clash Royale matches are inherently volatile, with randomness in starting hands, unpredictable opponent decisions, and countless variables affecting outcomes. The Valkyrie provides a stable foundation amidst this chaos. She does what she's supposed to do, consistently, predictably, reliably. This psychological comfort, knowing you have a dependable tool available, reduces anxiety and creates confidence. Players return to the Valkyrie, not just because she's effective, but because she's comforting, a familiar friend in the turbulent arena. The versatility to fit multiple deck archetypes and strategies prevents her from becoming associated too strongly with any single meta period or playstyle. Cards that define specific metas often fall into obscurity when those metas pass. The Valkyrie transcends individual metas by remaining useful across diverse strategic contexts. Whether the current meta favors beatdown, control, cycle, or spam, the Valkyrie finds a place. This adaptability ensures she remains relevant regardless of how the game evolves, how new cards alter the strategic landscape, how balance changes shift competitive priorities. The emotional resonance of her design and character creates attachment beyond pure mechanical utility. The distinctive orange hair, the operatic battle cry, the satisfying spin animation, these elements combine to create a character rather than just a game piece. Players develop genuine affection for her as a character, wanting to include her in decks not just because she's effective, but because they enjoy having her presence. This emotional dimension of game design, creating characters players care about, contributes to long-term engagement in ways that pure mechanical design cannot achieve. The balanced power level that neither dominates nor disappoints keeps her available as a viable choice without warping the competitive landscape around her presence or absence. Overpowered cards that dominate the meta create unhealthy game states where diversity disappears and every match feels samey. Underpowered cards that never see competitive use waste development resources and disappoint players who enjoy those cards thematically. The Valkyrie occupies the healthy middle ground where she's competitive and viable, but not oppressive or mandatory. This balance is deceptively difficult to achieve and maintain, but it's essential for creating lasting positive presence in the game. The clear counterplay options prevent frustration that might turn players against her. When facing Valkyrie, you understand how to counter her. Air troops work, buildings work, ranged units work. The counterplay is accessible and intuitive, not requiring obscure techniques or specific cards that only advanced players possess. This prevents the Valkyrie from becoming a noob stomper that dominates low-level play while being useless at high levels. She remains balanced across skill tiers because her counters are universally accessible, while her optimal usage requires skill that develops with experience. The cultural legacy and community attachment create momentum that perpetuates her relevance. Because she's been popular historically, because countless players have memories and stories involving her, because content creators continue producing Valkyrie content, she maintains visibility and mindshare within the community. New players see this cultural presence and want to participate, want to understand why this card is so frequently discussed and celebrated. The cultural momentum becomes self-reinforcing, where past success contributes to ongoing relevance, which creates new memories and stories that further cement her place in the game's cultural landscape. The teaching value for developing players gives her continued purpose beyond high-level competitive play. The Valkyrie teaches fundamental Clash Royale principles better than almost any other card. She teaches area damage versus swarms, defensive positioning, counterplay recognition, resource management, all in a straightforward package that beginners can grasp. As long as new players continue joining Clash Royale, the Valkyrie will remain relevant as a teaching tool that helps them understand the game's fundamental mechanics and strategies. The nostalgia factor for veteran players creates enduring affection that transcends current meta viability. Players who have used Valkyrie since 2016 have years of memories associated with her. They remember their first successful skeleton army counter, their first tournament win with a Valkyrie deck, the countless matches where she saved their towers from destruction. These memories create emotional investment that makes them want to continue using her even when other cards might be slightly more optimal. The Valkyrie represents their personal history with the game, and maintaining that connection to their past provides meaning beyond pure competitive optimization. The design philosophy of incremental iteration rather than radical reworking has preserved her essential identity across years of updates. Supercell could have completely reimagined the Valkyrie multiple times, given her new abilities, changed her fundamental mechanics. Instead, they've maintained her core spinning area damage identity while making only incremental statistical adjustments. This respect for the card's established identity honors player investment and maintains continuity. Veterans can return after months or years away and still recognize and understand the Valkyrie. She's evolved, but hasn't transformed into something unrecognizable. The future potential for continued relevance seems secure based on her track record of adaptation. As Clash Royale continues evolving, adding new cards, introducing new mechanics, shifting competitive landscapes, the Valkyrie will adapt as she has always adapted. She finds her place in new metas, she synergizes with new cards, she counters new threats. Her fundamental toolkit of area damage and survivability will remain valuable regardless of what specific forms future threats and strategies take. Barring catastrophic misjudgment and future balanced decisions, the Valkyrie's endurance appears likely to continue for as long as Clash Royale itself endures. The ultimate lesson of the Valkyrie's endurance is that great game design creates tools that players love to use not just because they re-powerful, but because they re-satisfying, meaningful, and resonant. Numbers can be adjusted, balance can be tweaked, but the fundamental appeal of a well-designed character, performing their core function with elegance and reliability, transcends any specific meta or balance state. The Valkyrie spins, enemies fall, towers stand protected, and players smile. This simple loop of satisfying gameplay has sustained across millions of matches and thousands of hours of play because it is fundamentally, timelessly enjoyable. Closing reflection, we've traveled far together through the Valkyrie story. From the cold northern lands where ancient, Norse peoples told tales of supernatural warriors who chose who would live and die in battle through the translation of those myths into a mobile game troupe spinning her way through Clash of Clans villages, to her reinvention as a defensive anchor in Clash Royale's competitive arena, to her evolution with pulling winds that change how she controls the battlefield. We've examined her design, analyzed her mechanics, explored her strategies, considered her counters, and reflected on her cultural impact and enduring appeal. The Valkyrie is more than statistics and gameplay mechanics. She represents certain values and approaches to both Clash Royale and gaming more broadly. Reliability over flashiness, consistency over volatility, defense as important as offense, patience and positioning over aggression and luck. She teaches that mastery comes through understanding fundamentals deeply rather than chasing complexity for its own sake. She demonstrates that simple concepts executed excellently often outperform complicated strategies executed adequately. For the millions of players who have deployed her countless times over the years, the Valkyrie has been a companion, a teacher, a guardian. She saved towers from destruction, enabled countless victories, provided the defensive foundation that allowed offensive strategies to flourish. She's been present in players' first matches and their 1000th matches. She's been part of ladder climbs and tournament runs, casual clan wars and championship finals. She spun through 8 years of Clash Royale history, always recognizable, always reliable, always ready to defend. As you drift off to sleep, perhaps you'll dream of battles yet fought, of perfect placements and satisfying spins.